Welcome everybody to the regular meeting for October 25th, 2023 in the Civic Room at the Comox Valley Regional District Office. Just like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of our land. Any introductions of late items? And I have Councillor Moore. Okay, no late items. And we've done adoption of minutes, so we'll move on to Councillor Moore. Sorry, that's why your light was on. Sorry, I have two mice here, so I got to dual them up a little bit. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Mayor. Since the resolution was passed to report on the toxic drug deaths, this is our first acknowledgement. Courtenay Council would like to acknowledge the deaths of 21 Comox Valley community members in the period of January to August 2023 due to the unregulated toxic drug crisis, for a total of 163 deaths of Comox Valley community members since the public health emergency was first declared. Our hearts go out to their loved ones. We want you to know their lives matter, and Council will continue to push for action and effective policy to stop these preventable and unnecessary deaths. And I wanted to note that since the resolution, which was not that long ago, there have been 9 more deaths in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Next, we have a presentation from BC Housing, and we have Sarah Smith coming to give the presentation. You just push the button again and I'll get the microphone going, and over to you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I just want to add that Emily Kendi is going to be presenting with me. She is a senior communication advisor and she also lives in Courtenay. Yeah, let me find this again. Yeah, I think we're good. Thank you. Here to provide a bit of a housing update for the city of Courtenay, specifically an update on the progress we've been having on the temporary use permit conditions at the 1885 Lodge supportive housing property. So this is just a list of all of the housing that's been completed in Courtenay in the last 5 to 10 years. So these are all relatively new, affordable, supportive seniors and middle income rental housing. Currently in progress in the city of Courtenay, we're working on a community housing fund project, Weche Friendship, as well as an affordable rental housing project with the Comox Valley Transitional Society. In addition, we have 2 emergency shelters, the Connect Warming Center and the Salvation Army's Pidcock House that BC Housing provides operational funding to. So since the lodge opened, BC Housing is continuing to work with city staff to meet the requirements set out. Just going to go through the list here. So as part of the building permit application process, BC Housing is completing an upgrade to the fire and life safety system. This will include a sprinkler system as well as a fire panel that will have the ability to silence false alarms. We've also entered into an operator agreement with the Comox Valley Transition Housing Society. I'm going to let Emily, my colleague, speak to the community advisory committee that was formed to work with the community.
I decided to tag along today because I live just down on Dingwall, and I'm also part of the CAC, the Community Advisory Committee for 1885 Cliff. I helped to develop that committee, and the first meeting was the end of October. The CAC's really our goal with those is to monitor, manage, and resolve any issues that come up for the residents and for the nearby neighbors as the supportive housing facility becomes part of the community. But beyond that, it's also about inclusivity. And a big part of the CAC work as a group is to look at ways that we can integrate the residents into the fabric of the greater community in Courtenay, and to be good neighbors with the direct neighbors as well, and look at ways that we can engage together for safe and healthy community as a whole. And I'm happy to say that the group, the Courtenay CAC group for 1885 Cliff is a great group. We've got probably about 9 representatives from police, Island Health, the city, Comox Valley Transition Society, the operator. We have the manager of the nearby McDonald's. We have a senior society member, Comox First Nations. And then we have 2 direct neighbors who are also on that committee. And one of the direct neighbors was actually one of the most vocally opposed to the project when we went out to the community with engagement earlier on in the year. And he spent a few minutes talking to us in the first meeting at the end of October, explaining that he was wrong. And he took a few minutes to illustrate to us as a group his learnings, really about the perception of supportive housing versus the reality of it. He expressed that he had a lot of fears before it came in, fears that there was going to be an increase in crime, an increase in noise disruption, an increase in drug use. And he said happily that it's actually a vast improvement from the Super 8 that was there before. And we just had our second meeting last night, and he did reiterate that he's really happy about what he sees, and to keep up the good work. And he's really become an advocate for us. He's working with the direct neighbors now to help educate them. And the CAC is also an educational forum, not just for the direct neighbors, but even for the police officers who attend, or anyone of the committee members can learn more about the supports and the services within the supportive housing facility, that it isn't just a place where people are going for beds, but that it's part of a phased solution from, homelessness to independent living. So there's a lot of education in those CACs as well. And so now we are looking at putting together a hot chocolate event, inviting the direct neighbors. The residents of 1885 Cliff have expressed a lot of interest in being part of the community and looking at ways to engage with the direct neighbors. So we're planning hopefully more than one activity over the next year, which is the length of time that the CAC runs. And then I also wanted to send a shout out to the CLEAN team. The Comox Valley Transition Society works to provide programs and volunteer opportunities for the residents who live there. And one of the most popular groups is the Volunteer CLEAN team. The residents who are part of that Volunteer CLEAN team have indicated that they've had a lot of positive support from the community, and it's making them really happy. And they're looking at other ways to be part of the community now. But they say that when they're out picking up trash in the orange vests, people will wave at them or say hi or thank them for the work they're doing. So it's just another example of how the community is working together. And that's where we're at with the CAC at 1885.
Thanks, Emily. And in addition, there's just a few legal agreements that we're working to execute with the city versus statutory right-of-ways, and a letter of indemnity for some of the work that was installed that would be considered outside of the property zoning. I think the next steps for us, once we have the building permit application, would be to tender the renovation work, which we'll have to manage while the folks are living there. So there'll be some staging and some temporary moves involved. But we're really hopeful that we could start that fire and life safety upgrade work this coming winter. So this slide just talks about the lodge. I think everyone's quite familiar with supportive housing. As you know, it was initially open to serve the folks that moved into the travel lodge during the COVID-19 pandemic. But CVTS continues to place new people that are ready for supportive housing in the building, and they'll continue to do so for the duration of the agreements there. So that's it for the formal presentation, but we're happy to take questions now or later.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thanks very
Okay.
much. We have a question from Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thanks for the presentation. It's nice to hear an update on how the transition over to what was the Super 8 has been going. And I would say it also matches my observations. I don't live in the neighborhood, but it is on one of the routes that I travel on my bike, and it does look like it's settled in quite nicely. And I'm glad to hear that that's generally what you're hearing reflected back from the neighborhood. I know change is always difficult, so it's great to hear that it's been for the most part fairly positive. I have two questions. One is just around the long-term vision for the site. There was mention of renovations, and I know how the building, when the building was acquired, is not really the long-term expectation of how that site is going to look. So I guess my question would be, is there plans in the works for major changes, or is that further down the road? And whether or not the current, I think it was 67, I'm not sure if that's 67 rooms or 67 people, if that's like at capacity, or if there could be a change to that number as time goes on.
Thanks, Councillor. We checked in with CVTS right before this, and it sounds as if there's one vacancy currently, but the supportive housing is almost at capacity. Unless there was an issue with the operating, we wouldn't look at reducing the capacity, because from our understanding, there's need in the community for supportive housing. So we certainly wouldn't look at not offering up new rooms to new tenants.
No, I was meaning an increase, not a decrease. I don't know if that came across in my question.
Oh, I think we're almost at capacity. There's one unit available at the moment, and we will be filling it. Yes. In terms of the long range plan for the site, right now the permanent shelter and permanent supportive housing is our urgent priority. It's obviously always in the pipeline, but we don't have any plans that we could share at this time for the property.
Great, that makes sense. And then this may be a better question for the operator, but I'll ask it to you. Generally, like when someone becomes stabilized in supportive housing, and we're talking about a transition, it's a transitionary point. And ideally, they're able to transition to housing that needs less services and is maybe in a different type of environment. But how difficult is it for people to move beyond that supportive housing framework, just given the challenges around affordability and other housing options?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Certainly, CVTS has an affordable rental building coming online in the spring. I believe it's 42 or 48 units of a deeply affordable rental. So I think that's going to be a great opportunity to explore if there's folks living in supportive housing that are ready for a more independent, affordable rental. For some people, they'll spend their entire life in supportive housing, but yes, there's always opportunities where people can move to a more independent rental. So I'm hoping that this other building is a great opportunity to explore that with these residents in particular.
Great, yeah, that's good news. Thanks.
Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. First of all, you'll recall that council had some misgivings about this project originally. we were concerned about moving people from one temporary location potentially to another temporary one. And we were also concerned that it didn't actually create any new housing units. But I think that there have been a couple of side benefits, and I am really pleased that the transition has gone well and that this has become a safe home for the numbers of people that you've talked about. And the work around the Community Advisory Committee sounds great. But I'm just wondering if it's safe to say that BC Housing has had more concerted efforts to work within and with the city of Courtenay through this process, and that we might see some other benefits from that in the near future.
Thank you, Councillor. I can speak to my own experience since joining BC Housing and working with the city staff. Certainly the amount of time that we spend together in the staff to staff meetings has really helped us understand the need and demand in the community, as well as looking through the various properties every 2 weeks. I would certainly consider that a side benefit to the amount of time and investment that we're looking to help support the needs here.
That's good to hear. And it's also good that you have a staff person who actually lives in the community. I appreciate that that's probably more a function of the mobile workplace these days. But would you visualize the possibility that BC Housing would actually have an office in Courtenay and that the staff person would have responsibilities that would involve, for example, working with our community on the need for an emergency weather program that we're now in crisis mode on these days?
Thank you, Councillor. It's a great question. I'd be the first to try and get that position. I don't live in Courtenay, but I did grow up on the island and I learned to ski at your mountain here. So great question. I don't know. I do know that we're always exploring satellite offices, but love the idea. I'll take that back.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're still evolving in the role of BC Housing. It's certainly far more proactive over the last 5 or 6 years than it was previously. But I think there's room for another proactive step, which would be that establishment of a local staffing position that would in fact take the lead on some of the initiatives that we're currently scrambling with our various agencies. And on that subject, we did have a meeting in this room yesterday with the regional district, with all the elected officials, people from the Coalition to End Homelessness and others. And one of the requests that came from the coalition was for greater transparency around the planning and the processes. So I'm just wondering if BC Housing has an ongoing working relationship with the Coalition to End Homelessness and is keeping them abreast of developments as you move forward with trying to meet the housing needs in this community.
Yeah, thank you. Another great question. I would say yes. We've been meeting with the coalition on a regular basis, as well as Comox Nation. And we talked about it earlier. We would very much like them, as well as other community partners, to be part of the planning and design process for new developments in the community. You know your community best, and obviously would welcome that participation.
That's great. Thanks very much.
Excellent. I don't see any other questions or comments at this point, but just really want to, I think this has been a bit of a learning curve. If I look at the last 9 years I've been on council and seen how things unfolded with the junction, and just really want to emphasize how that community engagement, I think, really did well. As well as, I think the Transition Society deserves a lot of credit for making, funny enough, that transition from the two locations, but not just doing it well, but doing it to a point that really exceeded everybody's expectations. And I think Councillor Hillian even spoke about exceeding our expectations. So really just want to thank everybody who was involved to help make that happen. And that's really how we can bring the community into these conversations in a positive way. So just want to say thanks so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. Are there any late items?
Is it okay, Mayor? I do have a late item. That's okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the late item on a notice of motion.
Okay.
So can I read it out?
Generally, we do a vote to make sure council's in support, and then later on, we have new business, I believe, where we would.
We'll add the notice of motion section back into the agenda. I'll figure out where that goes.
Okay,
Yeah, the notice of motion is for a motion titled Safe and Inclusive City Facilities. I can read it out if council would like. I've also emailed it out to everyone.
and it's a notice of motion as well. We'll take questions. Councillor Moore.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering about process. And our notice of motion, usually the motion comes the following meeting. So yeah, I just don't know how we handle it in this situation. I mean, been trying to, I don't know if there's any guidance from staff around that to
Yeah.
clarify the policy around it.
Yeah, I mean, we do have policy, but that's why we have a late item section. And then this late item is a notice of motion. So then it's, I don't know if that makes sense. So the motion wouldn't happen today. It would happen at the next one. And, but I'll pass it over to staff.
I think I understand the question to be, how does this relate to our procedure bylaw? So in the procedure bylaw, the notice of motion is provided the Monday before the agenda is published, and it's on the agenda as notice of motion. So in this case, if you chose to add it as notice of motion, you're in essence suspending the rules.
All right, and Councillor Frisch.
Thanks, Mayor. Well, I think if, if saving 2 weeks is really important to this issue, I would support that. So if there's a case for that, then I wouldn't mind suspending the rules to put this notice of motion on, but I'd like to hear from you if you think that's necessary, or if it could in fact wait the procedural, it would be a month before it comes back, I guess, in earnest. So how do you feel about that?
And
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. This is the motion as you'll see in your inbox, and I can also read it out, is in response to some recent activity across Vancouver Island around groups who are going to be in our community very shortly. And it's in response to that to really ensure that the city's responding to the issues that are coming up in the community. And we've received a letter from a community group asking to address this as well. So it's in response to that. The specific events happening in the community are happening this week. And so that's where the sense of urgency was to get this tabled today so that we can address it at the next meeting.
Okay, and I guess I'm wondering if it gets brought back in 2 weeks to be voted on, does that create some action that helps the situation, or is it merely just bringing it onto the table for discussion?
Yeah, so as it's written here, is to ask for staff to outline some options for us to consider.
Right. I mean, I would recommend that you just read it out during your staff reports. But I guess I don't know a lot about it, so it's hard for me to say at this point. Sorry.
You've asked for late items, so I'll take a vote on it from council. Oh, good call. So.
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been seconded. Any further questions or comments now that it's been seconded? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? And we'll put that into the notice of motions later on. And when we get to that point, I'll get a nudge. Hopefully I won't miss it again. So I'll try to stay on track. Okay, thanks council for that indulgence. And we'll move into item 6, staff reports, recreation culture, and we're going to talk about the lease renewal. And I'll pass it over to Ms. Saunders.
Thank you. Through the mayor to council, the purpose of this report is to seek council approval of a 1-year lease renewal for the Connect Community Access Center located at 685 Cliff Avenue, as well as to receive council direction on the consideration of the placement of a temporary washroom at that location. Just for council's information, there are two distinct recommendations for council to consider. So I'll speak to the lease renewal first, and then I'll speak to the washroom recommendation. So on November 1st, 2021, council entered into a lease agreement with the Comox Valley Transition Society for the use of 685 Cliff Avenue for the provision of day services and overnight shelter. Last year in September, the lease agreement was amended to include the entire building to enable the expansion of an overnight shelter, resulting in a total of 33 year-round shelter beds. And this expansion enabled CVTS to access year-round shelter funding from BC Housing. Previously, it had only been a temporary winter shelter or extreme weather response funding. The lease agreement includes lease renewal options in 1 year increments up to a total of 5 years, with each renewal subject to council approval. If approved, this renewal is approved. If approved, this renewal will be the 3rd year of the lease. So there would be 2 further 1 year lease renewals for council's consideration. The staff report details the services that Connect provides to individuals who are unhoused or experiencing the impacts of mental illness and the unregulated toxic drug supply. BC Housing, through operating agreements, provides the funding for the provision of shelter at Connect. The Strengthening Communities grant provides additional funding to support day services provided at Connect that are not funded through the shelter operating agreement. I think it's important to acknowledge, and it's referenced in the staff report, that while services at Connect may partially contribute to an increased congregation of individuals within the vicinity as they access Connect for critical health, nutrition, and social services, the 2023 homeless count for the Comox Valley also demonstrates an overall increase in homelessness in the community since 2020. Without the services of Connect, the city would see a greater number of individuals unsheltered in the community, which is especially important as we approach the winter months. And just to speak to the second recommendation, which is seeking council direction regarding the placement of a temporary washroom facility adjacent to Connect. Staff in our conversations with BC Housing have been aware that there is an opportunity to locate a temporary washroom facility next to Connect. BC Housing has a facility that they could make available to the city of Courtenay. Additional washroom capacity would be beneficial to the community and especially those experiencing homelessness, and to address the insufficient washroom capacity within Connect itself, which is detailed further in the staff report. We've done some initial work as staff to understand the implications of locating a temporary washroom facility. And council may recall a report regarding the Urbaloo pilot that also outlined some considerations when we put in washrooms, public washrooms. So a couple of key things: washrooms need to be supervised to ensure the health and safety of users and also the ongoing viability of the facility. So costs for supervision would be available through the funding provided to CVTS through the Strengthening Communities grant, because it funds their day services and additional staffing. But that funding is only available until the end of June. So funding beyond that time period would have to be secured. Capital costs, so to connect a temporary washroom trailer to city services, initial estimates would be in the $50,000 to $100,000 range. Capital budgets for required sewer, water, and electrical connections. Something that we were able to confirm outside of the report, so I apologize, but if the city chose not to pursue connecting directly to these systems, we could reduce capital costs. However, we would have to look at having a company service the trailer on an ongoing basis, and that's typically in the $10,000 to $15,000 range per month to service a trailer. So either way, there are financial impacts. So staff have done initial exploration with BC Housing and internally, and are seeking direction from council before continuing with further consideration of placing a temporary washroom unit at this location. If council directs us to continue to explore this, we would report back with final costs and options at a later date for council's direction. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Appreciate that. If there's any questions or comments, Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks to staff for the report. So the challenge that we have with this is that we've been continually reassuring the community that this is a temporary location and that we're working hard with BC Housing to find a permanent site for a purpose-built shelter. We may have some optimism in that regard, but we have no announcement at this point. How do we reassure particularly our downtown business community who see the challenge that this presents at their operations on a daily basis? How do we convince them that by putting a washroom there and extending the lease for a year, that we actually have any optimism that we're going to get the appropriate services through our work with BC Housing?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question through the mayor to Councillor Hillian. I absolutely appreciate that it's a really difficult situation for everyone involved. I think speaking specifically to the washroom, we do know that there's concerns in the community about public urination and defecation. So the addition of additional washroom facilities would help alleviate some of those concerns. Of course, it doesn't mean that it will be completely addressed. We do know that the washrooms that connect, there's only one washroom available for the public during the daytime, which is insufficient for the number of folks accessing service. So, and I think even in discussion with the operator, there's a lot of considerations to be made, which is why we wanted to have some further direction from council if you want us to continue to explore that. And then we need to take a really detailed look at what it would take to operate it and make it successful and ensure that it's meeting as many needs as possible. It absolutely would meet the needs of many folks who are currently unhoused and don't have sufficient access to public washrooms. You know, as you've heard, from our conversations with BC Housing, staff are meeting with them regularly on conversations about locating permanent purpose-built shelter in the community, and staff are very optimistic about that work. It hasn't been easy, but we're committed to it, and I think BC Housing is as well. That's one of the reasons that this lease renewal comes back on an annual basis. That's very unusual for our leases. Typically, they're done in sort of 5-year increments, so the intention is every year to review because it is meant to be temporary. It's the space that the shelter is in is not purpose-built for the service it's providing, and that's contributing to some of the challenges that we're seeing. And so staff and CVTS, I would say, are all committed in BC Housing to finding a permanent solution that meets the broader community's needs, and especially those who are currently unhoused. Just one final comment. I think the consequence of not renewing the lease does mean that there's 33 people more on the street each night, in addition to the approximately 95 who are currently unsheltered and living on the street, in addition to however many folks are accessing services throughout the day. And I think that will have a significant impact definitely on those individuals without a doubt, but also on our broader community as more people will need to find shelter in other places.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. And you know, in asking you these questions, please understand that I support the work that's going on, and I recognize the challenge that we have. It often reminds me of the old Far Side cartoon where there was somebody standing at the gates of hell, and on one door it said "damned if you do," and the other it said "damned if you don't." And you know, I just think we need to make it really, really clear to our downtown business community that we recognize the challenges that they're having, and that we're going to continue to work as hard as we can to get a permanent solution that will meet the needs of the people who don't have a place to live, but we'll do it in a way that is safe and secure for everybody who is living in our community. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian. Much appreciate that. Back to Ms. Saunders.
Thank you. Through the mayor to council, just 2 further comments on that. I wanted to add that the executive director of the Comox Valley Transition Society does sit on the board of the DCBIA and also the Safety and Security Committee, which I think has been beneficial to hearing and understanding the concerns from the business community. But also referenced in the staff report is the establishment of a community advisory committee for Connect. This was a requirement of the lease. There's a couple of reasons for delays, but it was going to be started in the spring of this year. And then with the move from the Travelodge to the Super 8 that delayed its initiation. And so our last conversation with CVTS is that that'll be initiated before the end of the month. And I think, as shared by BC Housing, community advisory committees can be really helpful and powerful in bringing diversity of voices to the table and really bringing the community together to talk about what the challenges are and the benefits and how folks work together. So that, I think, I just want to make sure that that is shared as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Ms. Saunders, for articulating that. Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mayor, and thanks for the report. I just wanted to ask a question about the washroom, and I guess to some degree it builds on what Councillor Hillian was saying, given that we are doing everything that is humanly possible to try and find a permanent location. I'm just wondering the investment of $50,000 to $100,000 in the hard infrastructure required for the washroom, if we're hoping as soon as we can to not be operating there. I'm just wondering if there are any other washroom options which don't require that kind of hard infrastructure investment. Like just curious about what other options are available for additional washrooms to connect.
And Mr. Garwood had a comment.
Yeah, through the mayor. I'll let Ms. Saunders maybe respond after. We have had a number of discussions on options to potentially work through this. It's my understanding that there are some constraints on the funding side of things, and that having a connected facility is preferred. We've explored a number of options, but we're coming forward to council and based on what we've kind of been advised is desirable. We do acknowledge that these are significant investments. The challenge is that, notwithstanding the fact that we opened a public washroom specifically for the purpose of trying to work through it, and we went through an exercise, that the fact is distance and people's needs and human dignity are resulting in public defecation and urination and the subsequent impacts very locally. And we feel that we wanted to get an understanding at a political direction on options to try and address this. I can advise that probably on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, my office is contacted specifically about this issue.
And Ms. Saunders.
Thank you. Through the mayor to council. In terms of temporary washroom units, there's a number of models out there, but either, regardless of the type of model, our two options are to connect them to city services or pay a sort of pumping and servicing fee on a monthly basis. And so those are the costs that are outlined. Additional options, porta potties, of course, are always an option, which can be less expensive, although also requires servicing. But as outlined in the, I believe it was outlined in the Urbaloo pilot report, porta potties come with significant health and safety concerns for those who need to access them, the users of those facilities. They also can be quite difficult to maintain and have other sort of health and safety concerns associated with them. So they typically aren't something that staff would recommend, although could be explored. Either way, a staffing model needs to accompany it to make sure those spaces remain safe for the folks accessing and using, and there are servicing costs associated. But generally our two options, if we're looking at a temporary sort of washroom trailer, which other cities have deployed as well, are connecting directly to services or paying a company to come in and service the equipment on a regular basis.
Okay. Can I follow up, Mayor?
Yep.
If we were to approve the option for further analysis, might that be part of it? What the cost of having a company to come in and remove waste rather than installing permanent infrastructure, would that be part of that report?
That's right. Put your microphone back on.
Yes, that would be part of the report. And staff would provide a recommendation based on that detailed analysis.
Okay, great. Thanks. I assumed that you'd looked at all the options, but I really appreciate just unpacking what they are at this point. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Cole Hamilton and Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks for the report. Yeah, some of my questions have been answered. I'll speak specifically to the washroom question. As I know you're looking for some feedback from council. Yeah, I mean, there's no question that the lack of washroom facilities is one of the biggest impacts that having such a growing unhoused population in our downtown core is having on residents and business owners. So I do think it is something that we need to put some energy into trying to solve. And yeah, it's a tough one because we're not looking to keeping services in that location, but right now it's a situation that we don't have a plan B identified for, and realistically, it's going to be at least a number of months before we know what that plan B is going to look like, and then it needs to be executed. So I think even a best case scenario, we're not likely to see a decreasing need for washroom facilities downtown in the next 12 months. So I'm certainly supportive of trying to figure out something that makes sense and knowing that it's temporary. I mean, last week, I think there was an announcement from the province that even construction sites with more than 20 workers needs to have flush toilets. So, I mean, there is obviously options for temporary washroom facilities. So hopefully we can find something that makes sense and is, was conscientious to the cost of providing that. My one question or concern, and maybe it's something that we'll have to mull over when this comes back, but the ongoing operational costs for CVTS, from the report, it looks like they could probably cover that until the end of the Strengthening Communities funding, and then after that it's kind of an open question. And I guess knowing fully what we're considering, would that land on the city to try and solve, or are we really just talking about the capital cost impacts, or is it really two problems that we're going to be looking to solve come July?
Ms. Saunders.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor McCollum. In regards to operating costs, you're correct. Currently, the cost of providing staff and peer support to washrooms could be covered through the Strengthening Communities grant. The other opportunities for operating funding could be for CVTS to look at negotiating it through their operating agreement with BC Housing for the shelter, which does provide 24-hour staffing. But their current operating agreement does not provide funding for that service. Typically, operating agreements are negotiated at BC Housing's fiscal year end, so in March, April. So there is an opportunity for that negotiation to happen. Of course, I couldn't speak to what BC Housing would or wouldn't do, but that's a time of year when every nonprofit with an operating agreement will try and negotiate for new costs. So I think there would be an opportunity there. And otherwise, of course, we could look at grant funding, or of course, consider the city providing the funding for those staffing costs. But our preference would be to try and work with BC Housing and or secure additional grant funding for the temporary period that they're there.
Thanks for that answer. And is it okay if I ask another question?
One more.
I'll make it quick. I'll use less words. Yeah, so the other question I just had is around the wind down to the Strengthening Communities grant. It sounds like that's not a grant that's going to be renewed as far as we know. And we have a lease here that that essentially the operator is recouping their costs of the lease through this funding, or am I correct in saying that? And then some through BC Housing for the shelter?
Through the mayor, Councillor McCollum, I need to look back on where the funding for the lease comes from. It's possible it's actually through the BC Housing funding. The majority of funding for the operations at Connect are through BC Housing's operating agreement. Where the Strengthening Communities grant comes in is those additional day services, which is in the form of additional staff, peer engagement, and peer workers, as well as security. So when Strengthening Communities runs out, which is at the end of June, and you're correct, we have no indication that it would be continued. We already received a continuation of it, which was lovely and unexpected. CVTS would have to adjust its operations accordingly unless through its operating agreement with BC Housing, it can negotiate additional funding for those day services. So BC Housing funds all their evening work and a portion of the daytime, but it's because they offer services outside of typical shelter operations, they're not fully funded by BC Housing.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum and Councillor Zilliger.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks for the report, thorough report. I do appreciate you speaking to the realities of the increasing amount of individuals who have become unhoused since CVTS has taken over the lease to operate both the warming center and since then the shelter. And speaking to that in the report, I think that's a really important context for the community. Is we often hear from the community the impacts of folks who are accessing that service. And I did find it really interesting to see mapped out what the actual perimeter is for the facility, which I think is really helpful for the public to understand as well, the security's capacity to maintain things within the perimeter. And so I'm wondering if staff can speak to, because the perimeter is actually quite small relative to where most people who frequent our downtown would say that folks are beyond that perimeter. So I'm wondering if staff can speak to ways in which the city and our partners are working to support the flow over into the existing, the remaining of that space, the parking lot and by the library there.
Thank you through the mayor to council. Yes, the perimeter, the leasee has responsibility for the building and a small space along the side of the building between it and the parking lot where folks might see the storage area. That's the extent of their leased area that they have direct responsibility for. And there are terms within the lease for maintaining that area, the cleanliness of that space. I do know that the clean team goes beyond that area. So there's a peer employment program where peers are engaged to do some cleaning in the surrounding neighborhood. So they will go beyond, of course, the perimeter of the building into the parking lot, sometimes even over into the city hall parking lot. But they do not have any responsibility for the parking lot. That most of that is owned by the city. There is also private land in that area as well that the city does not have jurisdiction over. So there's a few complexities there. Our bylaw team, and I might pass it over to Ms. O'Connell to speak to it, but our bylaw team does do regular walks through the city hall parking lot, and I believe through the parking lot next to Connect, and enforces our bylaws accordingly in those spaces. But CVTS cannot, for instance, their security cannot enforce anything on the city land. It's really responsible and exclusive to the operations of CVTS.
Thanks. And thanks for the detail. It helps, I think, for people to understand what's going on in that general area. I guess a few questions around the lease. One of the sections in the lease speaks specifically to emergency weather. And I'm wondering if that's still applicable, given that there's now permanent, or I guess temporary permanent shelter funding for CVTS to operate year round.
Wrong mic went on.
Thank you for the question through the mayor to council. The original lease in 2021 would have spoken to that. There was limitations on the kind of shelter that they could provide based on the space that was there. But once the lease amendment was done in September of last year, and that enabled them to offer shelter year round and consistently after they completed the renovation. So there was sort of a series of steps that took place. The amendment was made to give them access to the entire building. They were then able to complete renovations that made that building safe for the number of shelter beds. And so now they are year-round, temporary year-round shelter with 33 beds. Previously, they would activate additional beds on certain nights, but that's no longer the case.
I got one more.
Okay.
Yeah. It's really quick, really quick. The letter from the provider speaks to 33 beds, which you just mentioned, but on average 26. So I'm wondering, I mean, I don't see the executive director in the room, but I'm wondering if you were able to speak to that that number and why why those beds aren't being filled.
Thank you for the question through the mayor to council. Unfortunately, the executive director is out of the country, so unavailable to attend tonight, so I can't speak to it. It is something that I can follow up with them.
All right, thanks for those questions. And Councillor Moran.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Just quickly, I'm not sure, it's just speculation, but that may be in the warmer weather. I think last winter that it was filled during the extreme weather, but I'm not sure about that. Yeah, I just appreciated the comment about the cleanup crews because I had a family member in town who lives in a community like almost every other community in the province that is experiencing an increase in people unhoused due to a variety of factors, which you heard about yesterday, the complexities and the reasons why so many people are unhoused or having housing instability. And they made a comment that they'd never seen so many people cleaning up downtown. They said in their community, which is a little larger than ours, that to their knowledge, there's nobody like the folks who are unhoused actually cleaning up. They said every time I've driven by Connect, there's people picking up garbage and sweeping and stuff like that. And they also noticed people in a little bit outside the core. And I think that was mentioned by the presentation about the lodge. So I just wanted to say kudos. I know that some of that funding is coming from strengthening communities, but if there's any way at all to keep that going, it is something that's somewhat unique to our area, I believe. And it was noticed by someone visiting from out of town. And interestingly, they said that their community was sadly, did not seem to be doing as well. So I think we are, in terms of the congregation of people, was much more spread out in that community. So I think it is really difficult. We're going by our experience, but it's certainly reinforced to me that so many other communities are experiencing these challenges. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Moran and Councillor Killian.
Thanks, Mayor. One of the concerns that I regularly hear from people, they worry about the toxic drugs that are out there and the impact that they see on people who are collapsed on the street and who just look in a dreadful state. And part of the question that comes up is whether what we're doing is actually helping. And I'm just wondering if it would be possible, because I know that through Connect, people get access to medical care. They get referrals to other sources of support. And I'm just wondering if as part of this extension, we could get some sort of report on the number of people who are actually being provided with services, the number that are actually able to move into, for example, the new building along Cliff Avenue, who get access to housing and other services through the Connect program. I think that would really help to people to understand why it's important that we keep doing this.
Excellent. Thanks, Councillor Killian. And I actually had that conversation with the executive director just before she left. It may have been because you said that to me. I'm not too sure, so I don't want to take credit, but Ms. Saunders.
Thank you through the mayor to council. Absolutely. And we actually do have all of those metrics and numbers available through the Strengthening Communities Grant reporting. And so we can include that if we are here again in a year, we can include that in the next report. But also we post the metrics on our website for the Strengthening Communities Grant for all of our service partners. So that is available for the public. We're in a bit of a state of transition because we received additional funding and an extension in September, which was 3 months after sort of the program had ended. So we're trying to restart that, but that will also result in a future report to council with a regular update on the metrics and what we're seeing and hearing from our service partners. And absolutely, they speak to harm reduction supplies, housing referrals, medical services. I don't know if they speak specifically to responding to overdoses, but We absolutely know that the services at CVTS amongst all the other services in our community are preventing significant numbers of death by just being present and able to respond in a moment's notice. So that's information that we can share with council in our future Strengthening Communities grant report.
Thanks, Councillor Helene again. And, I think a couple of things really to flesh out this conversation. Oh, actually, Councillor, well, okay, I'll flesh out just a little bit, but, the Connect Center really is the result of the BIA and the downtown businesses being very concerned with what was happening at our library for many, many years. And so it was council actually reacting in a proactive way. And I think that, as Council Moran mentioned, I mean, every community across our province has seen this increase in unhoused, a lot of it because just the cost of rentals. And then obviously we have all of the crises that are kind of going into that, and you throw a pandemic on top, and it has seen certainly this rise. And then to BC Housing, I would say this particular location was supposed to move. It was actually supposed to move years ago, and that didn't happen. And I would say this year we've had more than 5 face-to-face conversations with the Minister of Housing, and been very clear that this is a top priority. And I think with my conversations with our staff, and even BC Housing saying like they're meeting with our staff every 2 weeks to make sure that they're keeping that pressure on to find the best location possible as soon as they can. So I mean, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of heavy lifting, and I just want to appreciate all the work that's being done to make that happen. And again, things like community advisory committees and the cleanup crews really do help try to move through that destigmatization, which is a huge challenge. And just kudos to staff, because again, that Strengthening Community is also providing training and all sorts of other things to help address some of the challenges that we're facing right now. With that, Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to speak in favor of the recommendations and briefly say that, of course, we know that this hasn't been a perfect solution, but there really isn't a perfect solution. And that if we don't go ahead and take this opportunity to do our best, it's going to cause a massive problem. And yeah, and I will. Sorry, I just wanted to speak for about a moment. And also with the bathroom, the same story. Like if people don't have an opportunity to go to the bathroom somewhere, we can guarantee it's going to be a problem in downtown. And so with that, I'll just quickly move recommendation 1 and 2, or 1 is that council approve a 1-year lease extension between the City of Courtenay and the Comox Valley Transition Society for the continued use of the property located at 685 Cliff Avenue, as authorized in accordance with section 2.1, subsection E of the November 1, 2021 lease agreement.
All right, it's been seconded. Any further conversation? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. And Councillor Frisch.
Thanks, Mayor. And I'll also move that council direct staff to explore the placement of a temporary washroom facility adjacent to the Connect Center and report back to council with recommendations.
Okay, it's been seconded. Any further conversation? Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thanks, Mayor. In the work, I'm in favor of this. I guess curiosity, if it's possible for staff, and following up on Councillor McCollum's comment around, I think that there's probably some workstation stuff around washroom accessibility for staff, and the report had talked about 1 washroom for staff, 1 washroom for the public. And so I do wonder, I mean, the report talked about capital to be taken on by the city. And I do wonder if in this analysis, if you'll come back with whether or not BC Housing, as the funder of the operation, would be coming to the table to look at capital expenses for this.
Thank you through the mayor to council. To date, the message we've received from BC Housing is they do not have any capital funding available for this. They are providing the trailer to us at no cost. And that's it. Of course, we'll continue to explore that. And when we come back, if the recommendation passes, and when we come back, staff would provide an update on any of those conversations. But to date, the answer has been that they do not have operating or capital available, but they will provide the trailer and I believe get it to us because it's not currently located here for no cost, but no other financial contribution.
Excellent. And again, the Herbaloo was something that was desperately requested from our community. And I just see this as that addition. So really appreciate that. With that, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. And we'll move on to Parks and Rec implementation strategy. Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll move that based on the October 25th, 2023 report, Parks and Recreation Master Plan Implementation Strategy, Council approved the final draft of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan Implementation Strategy and attachments 1, 2, and 3.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. We have a presentation. So I'll pass it over to Ms. Saunders.
Thank you. Through the Mayor to Council, we do have a presentation. So I believe Catherine Barris is with us. She's our consultant through Urban Systems. I also want to acknowledge that Joy Chan, our Manager of Business Administration with Recreation, Culture and Community Services, is online. Joy has been the consistent staff member through the development of the Parks and Rec Master Plan, as well as the implementation strategy. So I'll give a very brief overview and then pass it over to Catherine for a quick presentation. The Parks and Rec Master Plan, just for context, was adopted by Council in 2019. The development of an implementation strategy was delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And as such, staff began working on it again in 2022, and then are bringing it forward to you now at this time. The implementation strategy is a key document that guides staff in our delivery of the recommendations contained within the Parks and Rec Master Plan, strategically prioritizing and aligning the recommendations with the OCP Council strategic priorities and community feedback. So I'll pass it over now to Catherine Barris, who will lead us through a presentation.
Hey, hello, Mayor and Council. Nice to see you again. We can go right to the agenda. Next slide, please. Susie has, Ms. Saunders has pretty much done a quick introduction. I think we have a couple slides on that. I'll do a very brief overview of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan and process, because I understand there are some new members of council since we were here last, and then an overview of the implementation strategy. Next slide, please. So as was said, we completed this project in 2019. Next slide. And it involved, the project had several phases. The very first phase was an asset inventory where we had someone out in the field recording the condition and characteristics of all of the amenities in your parks, which is actually a pretty progressive approach to park planning. A lot of municipalities have not done that for parks. Then we analyzed that and did a kind of background document that was finished in 2017. Then the next stage of the project was our community engagement. So we had a community survey that had over 900 respondents, which is very, very high for a project of this type. We were really excited about that. The city did a really good job publicizing it. We also did 8 focus groups, which are where we have really good conversations about the qualitative aspects of Parks and Recreation. The survey is a little bit more focused on quantitative. And then we also did 2 community workshops, which were kind of like open houses where we had lots of roundtables set up in the hall. With people talking to each other, but and then presentation, Q&A and such. So that led to the draft, and then I went out for community review, and we integrated those comments into the final master plan. Next slide, please. So the vision is, I'm not going to read it because a lot of these items are repeated on the next slide in slightly different words as the goals, but generally it's to celebrate the amazing opportunities in Courtenay and quality of life. And just the last sentence, I think, is that the city's forward thinking and addresses trends and emerging needs in parks and recreation. That was an important part of this, to really look forward to how things are changing and how needs are changing. So next slide, please. So our goals, improve connectivity, healthy, active community, access for all, protect and enhance beauty, protect and enhance the environment, connect parks and recreation with culture, enhance communication and partnership, and then sound financial management. So it was really great to have these goals, and they have really guided everything we've done since, including the implementation plan. Next slide. So we have quite a lot of recommendations. As you can see, the largest number are focused on outdoor recreation, and then a number are focused on indoor, and partly because you have so many more outdoor recreation opportunities in all those parks in the city, and then some are related to recommendations for policies and plans. Next slide, please. So examples of some of the recommendations for land acquisition, the recommendations focus on filling gaps in underserved areas, protecting more natural areas, and guiding parks in new developments to make sure you're getting sufficient parkland in your new developments. Under planning and design, it's really important to do good planning and design exercises for your parks. Because in the past, I think a lot of the park development was done kind of ad hoc, and there wasn't really a design exercise. And the parks have a lot more potential when you do go through a full analysis with community engagement. So doing some park plans and park management plans, looking at your fees and charges framework for programs and services. And then under capital development, doing some actual park improvements and adding some amenities, expanding and improving trails, replacing playgrounds as needed. And then some of the new amenity types we were looking at were dog golf leash areas, pickleball, integrated with tennis courts, I should say, skate park, and volleyball. This is outdoor sand volleyball. Improvements to Lewis Center, and then the beautiful outdoor pool and the renewal or replacement. And we appreciate that one is a challenging exercise, and recommendations for how to address that. So next slide, please. So for the implementation strategy, we came up with an evaluation tool. So we listed the 56 recommendations, looked at these in relation to your existing policies and strategic priorities. And then we came up with criteria and a scoring system to enable us to prioritize the recommendations and essentially determine what phase they would fit within. So there's another slide on that. So once we did all that, actually go back 1 second, sorry. So the strategy then looks at the phasing responsibilities, strategic alignment, and the costs of each recommendation. And the idea is that it will be reviewed annually, and projects will be incorporated into operating and capital planning for council consideration on an annual basis as you move through them. Okay, next slide now, please. So some criteria or some of the goals don't become criteria because some of them will be addressed in any project you do. So these are the criteria that may vary across projects, which enables us to evaluate their relative importance and phasing. So the community priorities and strategic alignment, safety and reliability. Here we're looking at, are there issues of concern now? And these will help to make something more safe. Community well-being and equity. So how many people will a project support, and will it support people with high equity needs? Does it address a gap? Things like that. Looking at life cycle costs to maximize the use of public resources, and consider ongoing maintenance, which is very important to consider when any new projects happen. Climate resilience, will this have any contribution to mitigation or adaptation to climate change? And then opportunities for funding and partnerships. So yeah, are there other sources of funding that could help the project happen? Okay. So once we ran through that huge matrix and with all the projects, we then assigned a phasing for each project. So some have been completed, which is awesome. Some projects are in progress right now. Some of the recommendations are addressed on an ongoing manner as part of just staff responsibilities. So those we call ongoing, and then we have short, medium, and long term within the 10-year timeframe. We've divided those up. We also assigned costs. Now, some projects have no cost because partly the money's been spent, or it's part of another project, or it's just part of staff's typical work and it doesn't need a budget assigned. We've then for the short-term projects, we've assigned an actual dollar cost. And for the longer-term projects, medium and long, we've put them into these three categories of cost levels: low, medium, and high. Next. So this is just an example of the project recommendations. You can see how we're reflecting the numbers and the actual recommendations from the park master plan, and then assigning a bit of a description of, well, that was actually the recommendation, and then a cost. So next slide. So this shows the matrix in more detail. So we have the phasing, we have costs, we have budget. Is it capital or operations? We have the key responsibility within the city, and then other departments that contribute to implementation. And then we also indicate whether there will be an operations and maintenance responsibility, and if so, who it is. And then we make comments as needed to help explain the project. So these are the short-term priorities. Philberg and Lewis Center feasibility studies, a youth study related to pickleball, community park planning. So 4 parks planned, identified for having new park plans, 1 nature park plan for Vanier, and it's a management plan for a nature park rather than a more comprehensive plan, so it's less effort. Sport field improvements that would happen with the CVRD, some youth amenities, and then outdoor pool renewal or replacement. Capital projects for short term, and that's again 1 to 3 years, McPhee Meadows, and then the others are dependent on the outcomes of the park plans and feasibility studies. Under land acquisition, the recommendation is to prepare and implement a park land acquisition strategy. And under service delivery, do a recreation needs assessment. So back to Ms. Saunders.
Thank you, Catherine. Through the mayor to council, of course, available to answer any questions. Just a couple points I want to highlight. The implementation strategy needs to be read concurrently with the Parks and Rec Master Plan. It's not a standalone document. But we'll use the implementation strategy to identify the capital and operating costs in the city's financial planning process. So that's where it'll come to council on an annual basis for approval for those funds that are necessary to advance those projects. And that will be done annually and updated annually based on changing priorities or needs. Also, the staff report notes that additional resources will be requested through the financial planning process in 2024 in order to support the delivery of recommendations. And then we, of course, will adjust the strategy based on available resources and funding, both capital and operating, on an annual basis. So we're here to answer any questions.
All right, thanks so much for the report. It's been moved and seconded, I believe, but we'll get into the conversation and we'll start with Councillor Moore.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Thanks so much for the presentation. Couple questions. I noticed dog parks may not seem that important to some, but we certainly do get comments periodically about dog parks. And in fact, that's going back to my first term. And I know other councillors who were there prior to me would say that dog parks has been a topic of interest for quite some time. And I do note it's in the medium plan 4 to 6 years, which seems like a long ways away, considering it's being kind of on the books for quite a while. So I have a question about that. And then I have a couple other quick ones if possible. Thanks.
All right, Ms. Saunders.
Thank you. Thank you for the question through the Mayor to Council. Dog parks are identified in the medium term, and that's based on feedback received through the master plan. And so in looking at what was short, medium, and long term, there's also the question of capacity to deliver. The other piece that I would share is that through park planning processes, if at that time there's an identified need or ability to accommodate a dog park in that park planning process, then of course staff would consider it at that time. So it doesn't preclude things from happening sooner if they fit within the other priorities, such as the park planning processes.
Right. So if the dog folks wanted it to be bumped up, they should have participated in greater numbers, I guess, in the engagement. Of course, the other question I bring up, which I've brought up before, is the bringing playgrounds to the Rick Hansen standard. And my recollection was that staff had said that we are going to work towards doing that bit by bit. And I wondered if that was included anywhere. And then I have had some questions about Woodcote Park. And my understanding was that that's near the top of the list for some improvements, but I didn't see that anywhere in the report.
Thank you. Through the Mayor to Council. Staff are working on procuring a consultant for the development of what we're calling a playground design standard or playground design guideline. And so once we're able to confirm that, we'll be sharing that information with council. But the goal of that work is to come up with a design standard for all of our playgrounds that addresses things such as accessibility. And in addition, what kinds of playgrounds, what sizes for what ages need to be located throughout our community. And also things like best practices and leading practices in playground design, so nature-based playgrounds, et cetera. So that work is proceeding and will be happening very soon. And so our playground replacement program, which Mr. Shaw might speak to or can speak to a bit in more detail, goes through the condition assessments of our current playgrounds to articulate our priorities for replacement. And I understand Woodcote is towards the top of that list. But our playground replacement will not occur until we finish the design standard guideline. We want to make sure we complete that before we replace any new playgrounds. And we expect that work will be done in, I don't want to overpromise, but mid next year at the latest. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
All right, thanks, Councillor Morin and Councillor McCullum.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, it's great to see this coming forward and seeing how we're going to move through implementing our Parks and Rec master plan. And I'm quite supportive of the strategy that was used in identifying our short, medium and long-term priorities. The question I had was just around our financial planning and the financial impacts that you touched on at the end of the presentation. And maybe just focusing on the 1 to 3 year part, because I mean, it starts getting a bit muddy if we, look forward for too far. But yeah, I guess my question is, we must have some accommodation for our Parks and Rec master plan currently, like in our previous budget, and in some way, I'm not sure to what degree. We don't really break down the future amounts in any detail when we're contemplating the current year. But looking at what's outlined in this report, and if council were to be supportive of trying to initiate like most of what's in the short-term planning, like what kind of financial impacts are we talking about in addition to what we've already forecasted in our previous capital plans?
Thank you. Through the mayor to council, I'll answer a bit of that question and then I might pass it over to Mr. Langmeyer to answer the rest. Previously in our financial planning processes regarding the Parks and Rec master plan, it was very project specific. It wasn't until we received the Growing Communities funds last year that we put sort of a bucket of budget in the future years to allocate those funds. I believe it was 500,000 over 2 years, so $1 million in total. The process for allocating some of the Parks and Rec master plans in the short term would be to take that 500,000 and apply it to specific projects. What you will see in the financial plan is sometimes they're articulated as specific projects, sometimes we're leaving it as a bit more generic because we need council direction before we can move on that project. So, or we need to finish a feasibility study before we could advocate to say, yes, we should invest that capital. So, but I would say that the items in the capital or in the Parks and Rec master plan in the short term do represent an increase in capital funding requests, and then that will be considered in the whole package that's brought forward to council in the financial planning process. But maybe I'll pass it to Mr. Langmeyer to add on.
You did too good of a job.
Yeah, and that makes good sense, and that is how I perceived this information. There's a few things that we've already identified as specific projects, and the things that are kind of more coming out of this prioritizing and have yet to be added. So then just the other comment I wanted to make is that in the short-term parks planning, there's a list of parks that are kind of falling in the same category, short-term and in need of planning. And just one that I wanted to pull out is the Vanier Nature Park. We recently had a delegation kind of requesting that be prioritized, and it also occurs to me that it's one of the lower cost planning projects. I assume that's because it falls more into the nature park than doing a full site plan. So just wanted to put my support for advancing that if we're trying to decide among those planning projects, and hopefully we would have the capacity to look at one of those more neighborhood parks with the typical amenities that people think of. I'm not sure if how much input we'll get into specific projects, if that's going to be discussed through the budget process, or if that's something that we'll see next year.
Through the mayor to council, Vanier in particular, and as Catherine mentioned, for most of our nature parks, these aren't park planning processes in sort of the bigger sense of the word. They're really looking at how we manage the park as it currently exists. And as council heard from a delegation a few weeks ago, we have an interested party looking to partner with us on how we effectively manage that space. There's not a lot of opportunity to do sort of significant planning around that park. It's really about how do we adequately manage the space that we have. The planning processes for all of our other parks is outlined in the Parks and Rec master plan, and any community parks would have a full community engagement process associated with them.
So would you not to put too much detail on the spot, but would you imagine that there could be capacity to do, a proper engagement planning and process on one of our neighborhood parks, like say Biltmore, in addition to this work that's been requested from the delegation whose name is escaping me right now, even though you just said it.
Thank you through the mayor to council. Yes, I believe in the short term, the recommendation is to look at park planning for 4 community parks. And then also including looking at how we move ahead on managing the Vanier Nature Park as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Councillor McCollum and Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thanks, Mayor. And thanks to staff for spending some time bringing me up to speed, as I'm new to the Parks and Rec Master Plan, and really happy to see this implementation strategy. I think it really aligns with the vision that we have as a community and the growth that we expect in the community. And it's quite ambitious. There's a lot in here. I'm really excited to see what comes of your presentation and budget time around how we can resource all the good work that's come out of the community engagement. One of the questions that I was curious, and staff kind of got a heads up because it was a question I asked them beforehand, but curious how we align some of the actions in the implementation strategy as it relates to park acquisition when we're talking about development. And more so curious around the ways in which the evolving landscape of the housing crisis and council's priority of creating more housing in community, how that can be managed in a way that allows for those conversations with developers and folks who want to divide their property, whether it be for parks or whether it be for linear parks as described in the implementation strategy.
Thank you. Through the mayor to council, one of the strategic priorities identified by council was to initiate a parkland acquisition strategy, which will be a strategic priority for 2024. And part of that strategy will include looking at how the city acquires land both through purchasing or disposes of land, but also through development. And so that's a process that will bring together all of our different tools and also recommendations and how we look at acquiring parkland. But I'll pass it to Ms. Wade to expand a bit further.
Through Mayor Wells to Councillor Jolicoeur, thanks for the question. As part of the development process, we have various regulations that we can use. And one of them is that when we're looking at a rezoning, one of the things that we are bringing into practice is looking at more master plan communities with parkland to suit the needs of the community. And we're working closely with Susie and her team as far as identifying these needs in reliance with the existing master plan for Parks and Recreation. And we realize that there's some gap analysis there that we're working on together as we go through those development applications. So what happens is, because those are larger parcels of property, they will go through subdivision. The idea is under subdivision, we can get 5% or take cash in lieu. And we're encouraging more broader master plans to identify the needs of those communities and identifying those parks as part of that zoning process that would come into the subdivision process as well. So we're trying to create alignment and having bigger picture visions on that by using those tools.
Thank you. And just one more question. I believe it's under ongoing activities. Also asked previously this question, but something else came after we spoke last, was around under trails, adding amenities, signs, benches, waste bins along linear parks as use increases, low costs. This is something that I would say, I mean, a year into this, that it's not frequently I hear from community members, but it's not infrequently. And it's often informally, oh, would be nice to have a bench here, or hey, I saw some garbage down at this part of the park. And so I'm wondering what metrics or what is the method that city staff use to identify, I think the term is, as use increases, or how do we make a decision that this is going to be the next place where we add an amenity?
Through the mayor to council. It's a great question. We have recommendations in the Parks and Rec master plan around, and I can't pull them off the top of my head, unfortunately, but around distances between benches and that type of thing. What we haven't yet done is pulled them into sort of a city standard and then understanding the implications for our operations group and our asset management around that. So that's a piece of work we have to do still. What I would expect is the playground design standard work that we're going through is also going to identify amenities that are recommended at each playground. And there's some work we're going to look at there to expand that beyond just playgrounds to try and help build a bit of an amenity kind of package. And then we have some work to do internally to bring all the specific recommendations, for instance, from the Parks and Rec master plan around amenities into a cohesive package that we can then work with development on, but also with our colleagues in operations.
Excellent. Some great conversation. I really appreciate the staff report as well as the great questions here. And I'll just maybe put a plug in for the dog park as well. But with that, I do understand things can take some time, but yeah, certainly it's been on the minds of many people in the city of Courtenay. So with that being said, we have the motion on the floor. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. All right. Yes. Thanks, Catherine. I'm echoing what other people are saying, but appreciate you zooming in and updating us on all the great work that's happening. So that's fantastic.
You.
All right. Next, we have Public Works for the Crown Isle Speed Limit Reduction Pilot Project. And Councillor Moore.
I was just going to move the resolution that council directs staff to retain the 40 km/h speed reduction for the trial area located within the Crown Isle neighborhood, and that staff be directed to expand the speed reduction program to include all residential neighborhoods within the city of Courtenay's jurisdictional boundary, with the exclusion of all roads classified as either arterial and industrial or designated as a truck route as time and resources allow. And further, that staff be directed to prioritize the implementation of an expanded speed reduction program with installation focused on the Safe Active Schools program and the cycling network plan.
All right, it's been moved and seconded, and I will pass it over to Mr. Shaw.
Great, thank you. To the mayor, to council, I'm pleased to be here to talk about a few traffic reports. We've got a few back to back. They're pretty data heavy, so if I get lost in acronyms, feel free to pick me back up off the floor. We tried our best to present them in such a way that they were fluid and easy to read. So I hope that you found that. So the first presentation here is to talk about the Crown Isle Speed Limit Reduction Pilot Program. This report aims to provide information on a local initiative focused in the Crown Isle neighborhood. However, as you can see by the resolution recommendation, that it also aims to provide context for an expanded program should council wish to provide such direction to staff. So a little bit of history. Prior to the implementation of the speed reduction pilot program in Crown Isle, residents in the Crown Isle neighborhood had contacted council and city staff on a number of occasions over a period of years, voicing concerns about speeding within their community. And the report outlines those communications and the actions undertaken by staff throughout that period. In 2021, council directed staff to implement a pilot project for speed reduction within the Crown Isle neighborhood specifically. Few tongue twisters in there, apologies. Staff are further directed to install 40 km/h speed signs and then report back on the outcomes, including the findings and results of that speed reduction strategy. And that's what we're here today to do. Through the speed study, traffic data, including traffic volumes and speeds, were collected at various locations in the Crown Isle neighborhood. And those results are summarized in Appendix D of this report. In short, the speeds of vehicles in the residential neighborhood reduced on average between 1 and 4 km/h on respective roads, with Royal Vista Way seeing the largest reduction of being 4 km/h on an average. These are on a weighted average over the 85th percentile of all vehicles traveled on any one road. So that means that 85% of the vehicles traveling on that one particular road at that time throughout that day or the study period have a reduced speed limit. So that's not encompassing all, but the vast majority. That's pretty common methodology when we talk about speed and travel speed within roads, and you'll see that this extends into my next report. Following the pilot program, resident satisfaction survey was issued to gain community feedback. It was important that the community brought this forward to councils we want to engage with them at the end of it to understand whether they deemed it to be as successful as staff did through the interpreted data. The survey indicated that the vast majority of residents, being 45 to 90%, are satisfied with the pilot's impact on speed and safety within the residential neighborhood. Also, residents within the study area were generally in agreement with retaining the 40-kilometer-hour speed, with 65% of those respondents wishing to keep it at this new limit of 40. I think it's important to note that the level of non-compliance within the posted speed limit increased substantially through the project. So stepping us back before we started, we had a 80% compliance rate with the posted speed limit being at 50. And when we transitioned to 40, that reduced down to 40%. So we went from a 20% compliance to a 60% non-compliance, or sorry, an 80% compliance to a 60% non-compliance. My apologies. It didn't impact the feel that the community had with respect to its interpreted safety, but also didn't necessarily have a large impact in the overall speed reduction, but still community-wide felt safer. And obviously, given the short period of time of study, it was only 1 year in terms of overall time frame. It takes time for people to adjust to a new speed, especially one that is identified solely within one neighborhood that doesn't expand across the city. In support of council's discussion today and in recognition of council noting the traffic calming as a strategic priority, staff have prepared a preliminary cost estimate for the expansion of the program to a citywide speed reduction program. And those cost estimates are attached in table 2 of the staff report. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that council may have.
Excellent. Thanks for the report. And we'll start with Councillor McCollum.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks for the report, Kyle. It's great to see all this data provided that came out of the pilot project. And but yeah, most of it I don't find much different than what we would have expected. I mean, at the time when we were considering this, it was pointed out that it is pretty hard to reduce driving behaviors with signage, and that it usually requires other measures as well. So yeah, I mean, I suppose if we're trying to reduce it by 10 kilometers an hour and we have average of 4, well, I guess that is maybe as good as we could have expected at the time when we did this project. The comment that I wanted to make is that I think really what we heard from the neighborhood at the time was really just a lot of concern around large commercial trucks doing 50 or a little more. And I don't imagine that that's really a stat that we can pull off of our data reader, but I think it maybe is a benefit that's lost a little bit in the data, is that if we have those large commercial trucks in that compliance group, and they really are doing closer to the 40-kilometer-an-hour speed limit, which generally it's my understanding that commercial drivers do actually tend to follow the rules of the road a little better than maybe your average private user, that there could be some benefit to this change that we're not quite able to pick up with the data collection methods that we're using. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of highlight that is yeah, it's a challenge for us to really provide that, but that may be the explanation why generally the neighborhood is pretty happy with the change, even though our data isn't really showing a significant change in the average speeds. But I'm happy with the recommendation, and I'm in full support.
Thanks very much, Councillor McCollum, and Councillor Gilles Coeur.
Thanks, Mayor. And I have to agree, it is nice to see a report full of data. I think that helps us inform. And I just want to understand that I have this correctly, that the speed 1 to 4 was the reduction, but we actually saw more people not following the new posted speed limit. But the perception from the community was in fact that people were slowing down. Is that correct?
100%, you nailed it.
And so the community has been very clear in the post-pilot project that they would like for this to continue. And so in that way, I feel of support. I guess two comments of concern, questions of concern. In the staff report under financial implications, you speak to the costing that you've done is not currently in the plan for 2024, both operational or capital. But council can of course give you direction to go forward with that. I wonder if there's been any thought around the staging of this. You've spoken, I think in one of the options was focusing on the school areas and the cycling or active transportation network, and then city as a whole, primarily the neighborhood community streets. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to a staging approach of what that would look like. And I guess where I'm going with my question is, you know, we are considering a lot of things with this upcoming budget. And this was not something that I had initially thought that this was going to be something that was presented to us. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts around how this might be rolled out.
That's a great question. Thank you for that, through the mayor to Councillor Delacour. In terms of staging it, and really that's why one of the resolutions was presented as such. There are a number of other important initiatives that are already on the on the docket for completion or execution, and that being the implementation of the CMP. The CMP has identified bikeway corridors that are already aimed to have a speed reduction. Those are identified in a 5-year plan in terms of implementation and have funding dedicated to it or towards it. So that implementation would happen in concurrent with this. One of the other strategic initiatives that council has articulated of importance is committing to safe active travels to school program in collaboration with SD71. And so that is getting well underway in the end of Q4 for 2023. And we'll see us come back with a report next year in 2024 in the early part of the year with recommendations of consultation of occurrence between those groups. As you'll see in the report that comes up next, schools were identified as one of those key areas of speed reduction. And so when we looked at what implementation might look like in terms of a strategic advantage within this, we looked at school districts and put a 1 kilometer radius on it in terms of feasibility of implementation. Just for that purpose, the number to do the entire city is quite high, and recognizing that schools' safe active travel commitment to cyclists are all things of importance, and that can stage us in a very short period of time to a finality or a near completion over the term of a 5-year period.
5-year term for the city, for all three, the schools, the bikes, and the citywide
as a whole.
Okay, 5 years. That's helpful because the number that we have here is $246,000, so it's not insignificant. The other, I guess, it's under administration implication on page 7 of the staff report, which I also see as a financial. It's the last paragraph, and I think it kind of goes hand in hand with the data that we have around compliance. So if more people are not compliant to the new speed reader, they're in infraction of the Motor Vehicle Act, which is RCMP activity. And you do mention that, so I appreciate you mentioning that. And you do speak to the request from staff for council to consider prioritizing in the annual performance planning for the RCMP. And I just wonder if you have any insight if whether from other communities, when communities move through a process of making their streets safer from a motor vehicle perspective, and this change that we're being presented with today, if there are any type of indication that costs related to RCMP through requests for increased service levels, if there's any attachment to that. Again, budget season's coming up, and so this is where my questions are coming from.
Yes, great question. Thank you for that. Again, through the mayor to Councillor Delacour. There's a lot in there. I will say, generally speaking, the trend across communities in BC is to go to the shift to do a reduction within the residential neighborhoods to whether it be 40 or 30 kilometers an hour. You are seeing great success within communities, even intimately here within South Island, the city of Victoria and Saanich are moving in that direction. They actually initially partook in a provincial study program that the province supported in terms of speed reduction to further the movement to reduce speeds as an entry level as a whole across the community. So it would empower a municipality to drop its recommended speed from 50 to 40. That subsequently has been suspended. with the deferment that the municipalities still have the option and the ability to do it themselves through either bylaw or with the addition of installation of signage. And so that's kind of the trend has gone back to now doing it in that particular format. In terms of seeing success, and you are right, as we initiate this program, there's an awareness that needs to be brought forward in terms of our communities and expectation that we're going to be traveling at slower speeds through those residential neighborhoods. And so there's a transition. I even realized that myself as someone who's been driving for a number of years. I can almost uncannily tell you how fast I'm going just by the way the vehicle's moving, because that's what I know to be the recommended speed limit based on how quickly I see vehicles travel by. So we're asking people to now learn a new speed within our community. One of the advantages and disadvantages to some cities being larger and smaller than others is they have road networks that are not necessarily conducive to high speeds. Very grid-like large cities are very stop and go in terms of that. And so there's a tendency to have enhanced compliance within those when you have more broad ranged neighborhoods that have an ability to kind of cascade yourself through that neighborhood. And so that's where we're looking to provide other opportunities for implementation of traffic calming measures. And you'll see that through the policy development, which we'll talk about in the next report as well, to put tools in the tool bag for those traffic calming measures. Compliance and enforcement relative to compliance is obviously the most impactful. It's first and foremost, it would be one the staff would always recommend. Seeking compliance through enforcement sets the stage for continuation of respecting those boundaries within those posted speed limits. We would encourage to have those conversations with the RCMP. Staff have them at a staff level. We meet with ICBC, the Ministry of Transportation, and the RCMP on a quarterly basis to talk about items such as this. So we continue to advocate for their support. The resources obviously are limited within the Comox Valley specifically to address these type of items. But it's about the transition. It's about the long-term game, about getting there, seeking long-term compliance and awareness and education of our residents and the users of our roads. And that takes time. So really the focus of discussion today within that context of that comment within the report is allowing that time for compliance to rise. What would be troubling is to set the stage that we automatically turn it to 40 kilometers an hour. The compliance rate, the non-compliance rate rises, and then there's an expectation for further impact to happen immediately thereafter without a softening period for people to become aware and adjust to those.
All right, thanks very much. And we have some more questions. We'll go on to Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks for this, Kyle. I just wanted to build a bit on what Councillor McCollum was saying about people's feelings of safety, and I think that could be to some degree because speed readers, I assume, treat all vehicles equally. Like I know that I live on a community bikeway now, and we have a speed reader, and it tracks me on my bike, and I occasionally have to slow down because it's a hill there. But I would be being tracked just the same as a dump truck would being tracked. And I think in many ways it's the type of vehicles that are speeding, the type of vehicles that are complying that probably has a big influence on people's feelings of safety and on their actual safety. And I was wondering if there's any option with speed readers to add like a sensor that goes across the street that is able to detect what kind of vehicle, whether it would be interesting to know, for example, if large vehicles like dump trucks, which often have phone numbers and how's my driving doing on them, if they tend to have a much higher rate of compliance with the new limit than say, just the average driver. And if that were the case, that might indicate a greater value in terms of safety. So just wondering if there's any technology that would allow for that kind of just slightly more kind of nuanced analysis.
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer is yes. We actually have it in hand. They're speed tubes that are displayed or put out on a roadway with specific distance between them that tracks the amount of travel wheels that go across and then counts the wheels within timeframes and tells you roughly exactly what what type of vehicle that would be. I'll offer that the speed boards themselves are very easy to deploy. Although they do not provide that information, they're very easy to deploy and they're interchangeable. We can run them through cloud systems and get that information almost instantaneously, as well as redeploy them in new areas at new times and be very continuous in our approach. If we wanted to do a deeper dive analytic into one particular road relative to the operating style of that road and the vehicle usage, we certainly could do that. It would be a much more in-depth investigation to understand and much more data to analyze to get the output. But it is possible, and we do have the technology at Public Works to do that.
Okay, and we actually literally have the technology. Okay, well, making effective use of that sounds really wise. So it's good to hear. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Councillor Cole Hamilton and Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, excuse me. Thanks, Mayor. A couple of questions. Looking at the list of schools and the overall cost, I guess it's citywide as well. I guess staff would be suggesting that this would be rolled out over time and not necessarily all in 1 year. I wonder how that fits in with the community bikeway program. Like, is Puntledge Park already sort of at the point where it's taken care of, or going a kilometer would include a lot of other roadways as well? Is that right?
Yeah, that's very right. We put a 1 kilometer radius on it to provide an opportunity to encapsulate as many residential roadways as we could for those safe active travel opportunities for children to get to school in a mechanism which provides a safer atmosphere for them with speed reduction. So
sure. Would that at times like include roadways that might not be fit for a reduction? Like I think of around Courtney L, you've got Lerwick, which is a big wide road. It would probably get hard to get people down to 40 an hour, I guess, given how wide that is and visibility lines and such.
yeah, fair question. This report and the recommendation preclude major arterials, minor arterials, and those type of roads. So there would not be within that. It's specific to local roads.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch and Councillor Hilliard.
Thanks, Mayor. Just an observation, when this pilot study in the Crown Island neighborhood was announced, there was some critical comments that, gosh, Crown Isle gets their own pilot project to reduce the speed limit. Why not the rest of the city? Well, as this report clearly lays out, the residents there spent 5 years asking for it. And maybe we would have got here anyway, but basically, I think we can thank those residents for bringing this about, that we're going to get reduced speed limits in all the residential neighborhoods in the city. And it's by far the largest issue that I've heard about in my years on council, traffic safety in neighborhoods. So thanks very much for the work that went into the report.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian. And I would say, looking at the past few years, not just the pilot project, but the works that were done on 17th Street, which some people were somewhat frustrated by. But as soon as you start talking about that student safety and getting the students to and from school in the safest manner, whether we're talking about reducing the speed limits, I call them signaled crossings, although I know they have a much fancier acronym. But doing these things to really help shift how people are able to get across, the bulb outs, all those kind of safety things. Just really happy to see how these are really moving forward, and having that school district input, I think really helps us focus. And the feedback around Puntledge Elementary when that went to 40K right before school went in again was quite positive. So it's great to sort of see how this idea is moving forward. So just really happy to hear that. With that, we have the motion on the floor. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Next is, I was just going to mention, there's a few things going on. We have, at some point, we're going to have to take a break. There are people here for the bylaw adoptions for 9.1, the property tax exemptions. Not sure if there's any. This is exactly, yeah. So if we'd like to vary the agenda, we can bring that up forward. So we have, I believe, a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? Oh, would you like to speak to it?
Well, we didn't pass both of these recommendations, did we, under this item? Or did I miss something?
What I'm suggesting is rather than going into the,
Oh, so-
because there are two things, and I do apologize to Mr. Shaw. But just looking at time and breaks and stuff like that, I just figured if we, instead of doing 6.2.2, or we do 6.2.2.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that this item wasn't really completed yet, so, but maybe it doesn't matter to folks.
Yeah.
On this,
so
on
6
both
point-
of them?
So 6.2.1 is its own item, and then 6.2.2 is its own item.
Yeah, okay. It's just that.
I know they're
same.
extremely linked, and
Yeah, okay.
and we
thanks.
were even talking about them almost interchangeably, I would say, through this process. So I fully understand. But again, it's really just a time thing, and I just cognizant that people may need comfort breaks and food and stuff. So, but we do have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor of bearing the agenda. And so we will go to 9.1. And this is consideration for the 2024 permissive property tax exemption. And Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, I'm not moving what's on the agenda immediately because I'm feeling like we need a little bit of guidance on process. This particular item, we received an incredible amount of public input and feedback from. And so I guess I'm looking to you, Mayor, if how we can speak to that without necessarily moving the adoption, because we have some other possibilities. We got some, if we could get some information on how we can speak to it without necessarily moving the recommendation that's outlined.
Yeah, and so council to get some information. So if we don't move what's on here, that basically we could rescind the first, second, and third readings, make an amendment, and then we'd have to come back. But we'd have to come back and have a special meeting, I believe. But I'll get confirmation from staff. Mr. Garfield.
Through the mayor, just for clarification, maybe just like to understand what's being asked. So the recommendation is for adoption. You could move it, could be second for discussion and then voting. Then there could be an amendment if that's council's direction. I'm very weighing outside my own personal area of expertise. Perhaps our corporate officer can advise.
Yeah, Ms. Proton.
Thanks. You certainly can put a motion on the floor and then discuss it. So that's a good way to get something on the floor, is just to move and second a motion and then discuss it. If it's not the motion that's recommended, you can do another motion for discussion. If you do the motion for adoption, then I would, and you actually don't want to do that, then I would recommend that council defeat it and not actually amend that motion, because that would, if you're looking to rescind and do something different, then that would be the opposite of the motion, which we try not to do. Does that answer the question?
Sorry, you lost me. So if we move this for discussion, adoption for discussion, do we have to defeat the motion in order to consider something else? Like, I know one of the options is that we can rescind third reading. Would we defeat?
Correct. If council ends up wanting to do something that is the opposite of the motion on the floor, then the best thing to do is to defeat that motion and make a new motion. But if you have some idea of where council might want to go, then you can also make that motion instead.
Okay, I think it's probably easiest if we move the motion for adoption and then have the discussion.
And Kate's made a good point that these are all separate recommendations, and I believe the bylaw that we've received correspondence on is 3091.
Yes, yeah.
So there's a possibility of like adopting the other ones and then coming back to 3091 to focus on that one.
What would you like to do?
In the agenda, basically, if you'd like to move 310, 311, 312, 392, we can go through those, move them. If they pass, they pass. If they don't, they don't. I don't want to presume anything. And then we can come back to 3091 and
Okay, great. Well, let's do it in reverse order then. Because I don't believe there's any council conflicts of interest on the 3092. So I'll move that council adopt tax exemption churches 2024 bylaw number 3092.
it's been moved and seconded. I do see lights on. Did you want to speak to this item? Okay, seeing nothing. Okay, we've been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes. And Councillor Frisch.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll move that council adopt tax exemption 2024 bylaw number 3112, 2023.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Oh, okay. If you've got a conflict, Councillor Jolicoeur.
Yeah, I have a conflict with this one as I'm on the board of directors.
Okay. And Councillor Moore.
I just would like clarification before we get to it. The one that I have conflict with and I'm having trouble on my iPad finding it. So
Fair
John-
enough.
John
We can
Howard,
stand by for a second.
I could have some advance. Or I'm sorry, Transition Society. Oh, sorry, it's right here on the paper copy. Is it? No, it doesn't have the name. Sorry, I'm just looking at the minutes from the last thing where we discussed this.
Mr. Garvin.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And did you have any comments? Oh, you're off. Perfect. Okay, so 3112 is the one that's on the table. It's believe it's been moved and seconded. Councillor Jolicoeur has recused himself. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes. And we'll just allow him to come in. And then I believe Councillor Moore, and you'll be.
I'll recuse myself for this next one. Thanks.
Okay.
And Mayor, so
I need to say why, because I'm a casual employee of the Transition Society. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Moore, and we'll just wait till you've recused yourself.
So I'll move tax exemption 2024 bylaw number 3111, 2023.
It's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments regarding this? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes. And we'll invite Councillor Moore back in. And Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. Regarding tax exemption bylaw number 3110, I have a conflict of interest. I serve on the board of directors of the John Howard Society for North Island, so I'll recuse myself from this vote.
Thank you, Councillor Hillian. And Councillor Frisch.
I'll move that council adopt tax exemption 2024 bylaw number 3110, 2023.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that passes unanimously. And we'll just wait for Councillor Hillian to be brought back in. Which brings us back to bylaw number 3091. Councillor McCollum.
I'll move that council adopt tax exemption 2024 bylaw 3091.
It's been seconded. And any discussion? Do you want to speak to the motion?
Yeah, just for discussion. I mean, in my 5 years serving in this role and contemplating these tax exemptions, I've never seen so much engagement from the community expressing concerns for a particular community group receiving this the support from public tax money, because essentially what a tax exemption does is it reduces the amount of revenue that the city receives, and then that's made up by the remaining taxpayers. So what these tax exemptions look to do is support nonprofits in the community that are doing work that supports council initiatives and improves our community. However, we had quite a bit of discussion at the last meeting around whether or not, well, there was more than one of the applicants really met that criteria. And in this case, I do have some concerns specifically around one of them, Aaron House Ministries, that's been actively involved in the community in organizing protests against inclusive policy around what they refer to in the school system as SOGI, which the acronym escapes me, but the sexual orientation and gender identity education in our schools. And that certainly goes against what I believe personally, but also the values that we uphold as a council in terms of inclusivity and equity and discrimination. And I'll maybe leave it at that, but I'm expressing that I have some concerns around supporting an organization that that informs part of their work in the community is going against those types of values.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum. Any further comments? Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I know the last time we dealt with the exemptions, we also passed a resolution to update and our tax exemption bylaw so that it more clearly reflects the values of the city. And I guess I'm wondering, would staff be able to anticipate that process, which will define our new bylaw on exemptions, might be completed before the taxes for 2024 are actually due, just in terms of timing of when that policy might be available for consideration.
Mr. Garvin.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Cole-Hamilton, and thank you for the question. This work to develop and update the policy would involve input with our corporate services department and our finance department. Obviously, this is an important matter. The council give us that direction. We would have to come back to advise you on timing. And it may or may not impact the expected work program for 2024. We'll wait to get that direction if it comes and understand what the implications are in our own work program.
Sorry, maybe our Director of Financial Services would have more on this, but my understanding is that the deadline for permissive tax exemptions is October 31st for passing the bylaw. And at that time, the bylaw is due to BC assessment. And those are the exemptions for 2024. So the timeline is very tight now.
And sorry, the number on my list is different than the one you're on. Oh, yeah, Mr. Garvin.
Sorry, through the mayor back to Councillor Cole-Hamilton, just to clarify, the motion previously was to address the next round, develop policy, direct and assess the next round of permissive tax exemptions. That policy work wouldn't affect the matters in front of council at this point. So I just wanted to clarify when I'm talking about work in the 2024 work program. Okay, thanks.
So it would affect the 2025.
I am aware of that. I'll allow others to speak. I'll bring a follow-up question to that.
Thanks, Councillor Cole-Hamilton and Councillor Gilles.
Thanks, Mayor. And thanks, just wanted to start by thanking everyone that took the time to write us and to reach out to both me personally and to council as a whole. It's really heartfelt to know that the community really wants to see council act. I think that one of the things I've been really proud of this council is that we made it really clear where our values stand, and we've made multiple statements in support of 2S LGBTQIA plus community, against hate, against discrimination. And I think this is one of those moments in our community, in our political process, where taking action on something like permissive tax exemptions, which are in fact permissive by nature, meaning we don't have to do anything that is listed here. It's up to council to make that decision, is one of these perfect examples of where our leadership can come into play. And you know, there's been some inferences since our last meeting that this conversation has been about religion or religious freedom. And as a person of faith, I definitely respect and understand religious rights, but we've had multiple bodies in this province and across the country who have made really clear that religious rights should not be confused with the rights to oppress and discriminate against other marginalized people. In BC, one of the really great things I think has come out of this quite challenging situation is both the city, the province, and Canada have made its views clear on supporting safe spaces for children and youth. The Human Rights Commissioner of BC recently did an inquiry into children and youth in schools and found that 2/3 of LGBTQ students don't feel safe at school, and attempts to erase them from school curriculums are deemed hateful. Queer kids are disproportionately committing suicide, have higher rates of mental health challenges, and in our community in Comox Valley, we know that there's a disproportionate amount of queer youth who are homeless, which is why the community has responded with the development of a queer youth home. I really am excited about the opportunity for us to continue to assess how the permissive tax exemption policy can be aligned with our OCP, which has a strong focus on reconciliation and equity, on our recent anti-discrimination and response to hate policy that was passed last year as a result of Councillor Morin's motion. I know that staff will be updating this policy over the next few months. And as a community, I think that this is one of those moments, and we've seen from the letters we've received where members of the community are quite clear they do not want their tax dollars going towards supporting leadership or organizations that continue to move forward on things that are out of alignment with the majority of the community. I'll just end my thoughts by sharing a quote, which I thought was really insightful, from Ms. Govender. She's our BC Human Rights Commissioner. When the protests last week in September happened, where she stated unequivocally that human rights of trans and LGBT community members is not up for debate. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Jolicoeur and Councillor Frisch. Sorry. Okay. Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Well, I just want to start by acknowledging how challenging this is for me, and I suspect everyone around the table to tackle this. It's an issue that's, I think, come to the council table for the first time, and we're really being asked to act quite quickly on something that I think is actually not something that in this case can necessarily be done quickly. And I'll just start by saying that, you know, this is all, as Councillor McCollum pointed out, started around people creating rallies and starting protests against the SOGI policy at SD 71, and I support that policy. I think it's a great policy, and in fact, I think it's often misunderstood and described as something that encourages or discourages a particular view on sexual orientation and gender identification. And in fact, the policy really is about being inclusive and about being non-discriminatory. So I support that. Now, our tax exemption bylaw has never contemplated that particular piece, or is it, you know, is the organization inclusive in the way we want? When I looked at the requirements to get on the list, it didn't seem overly rigorous, but at the same time, it just asked, you know, is your community organization is benefiting our community? And I think it's worked well over the years. Now, I support looking at that. I support making those changes. But I also have to question, do we want to do this quickly in response to something that I know is very upsetting, but it's also very polarizing. And I think when we jump to take a stance without giving it proper procedure and thought, it opens us up to down the road being able to have it used against us in other ways. So somebody else doesn't like an organization and they can send in a letter saying, we don't think you should support this. If we haven't contemplated those things in our bylaw that mandates what an organization has to do to receive money, I think it's a little unfair just to make a quick decision at the last minute. So a couple other points I wanted to make. I think I do agree that the people that are organizing these protests are creating unnecessary fear around the SOGI policy, and I think I also noticed that there's far less support for people that are against the SOGI policy than there are people against discrimination. So I almost think it's a losing battle for them. But I think there is a fear that it might ramp up and we might see discrimination, rear its ugly head. So I'll just finish by saying, I want to support the idea that we want to support anti-discrimination and we want to support SOGI in our schools, but I also don't want to do it in a knee-jerk reaction way. And so I'm really cautious about that. I'm open to hear if council has any ideas on this. And we have made statements to this effect as a council, so I think that's really positive. And so unless there's, I guess unless there's a reasonable path forward that doesn't have us making a decision that's, based on, it's a little bit of hearsay. It's a little bit of, there's an article that suggests these people are organizing this, and that's directly what their organization is for. I mean, I don't necessarily understand who's organizing it. Is there proof that they're organizing it? And that really should be something that comes to us. There should be information that comes to us generally in a staff report that outlines, here's your policy and here's how these people fit or these organizations fit and don't fit into the policy. So I want to be really cautious about that. And I'd love to hear from the rest of the council if they have any ideas on how to do that.
And I'll pass it over to Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Thank you. I'm a second-time speaker, but I'm happy if that's all right.
Yeah.
I agree, Councillor Frisch. I think that having a clear policy is, that's good governance and that's a good way to go. And the reason I was asking about the potential completion date of our new policy is I'm wondering if we could remove an organization whose actions demonstrate a lack of alignment with our values, such as our statement in support of 2S LGBTQ1A+ inclusion and equity. And when our policy is completed, again, assuming before tax season, then reassess their request in light of that policy. And if they are in alignment with that policy, then we can always use a grant and aid to provide the equivalent of the tax exemption. This just provides a bridge which allows us to put in place clear policy and to apply it fairly. And I think this solution, takes away from the immediacy of the timeline and allows a more considered decision. Taxes wouldn't be due until it's usually early July of next year. If the report is completed before that, we could undergo that assessment and there would be no material impact on that organization in the meantime. So I was perhaps going to put that to staff as to whether they see that as a potential way of handling this.
Mr. Garvin.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Cole Hamilton. As I alluded to previously, this is priority work for us. It's my understanding through staff reaching out to other jurisdictions, property tax exemptions seem to be extremely important and discussed, particularly in central Vancouver Island at this point. The ability to consider a grant as opposed to property tax exemption is a method that a couple of other jurisdictions, I believe, have looked at in balancing these questions. And so we're able to do that. As I said previously, given the timing and the need to prioritize that work, we would come back to council and establish how that would be undertaken. And it may, I'll be clear, it may result in us deprioritizing other work. Although council has been quite clear in other deliberations around equity, diversity, anti-racism work as well. So it's a high priority for us.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the response on that and just wanted to put that out to council to consider, and I'll perhaps cede the floor to others to comment on that possibility.
Thanks, Councillor Cole Hamilton and Councillor Moore.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I really appreciate the suggestion by Councillor Cole Hamilton. I was thinking along the same lines. I think, you know, as Councillor Hillian, or sorry, maybe it was, can't remember who said that this is the first time this has come up, definitely in my term prior and now. We have had a couple weeks since the last meeting. I'll note that at the last meeting, this came up, but I feel like we didn't have enough information at the time. And 2 weeks have gone by and we certainly have had more information come forward as well as emails. And so I don't feel, excuse me, rushed per se. And I guess, you know, the whole, the piece around benefiting the community, I would say that that's kind of up for debate right now, considering the emails that we have received. And I like the idea that Councillor Cole Hamilton suggests in terms of you know, we already voted to look at our policy and then to reevaluate because I think we have enough questions right now around what's happening. I will also say that, you know, I worked in the excuse me, I'm losing my voice. I worked in the high schools for many, many years. And the issue of inclusivity and was hugely harmful to many young people I worked with. And as Councillor Jolicoeur pointed out, many youth who identify as queer are, you know, are bullied, experience trauma, and sadly some of them do commit suicide. And so I think that this policy, as Councillor Frisch described, is meant to help those students feel included, safe, all those kinds of things. And I think also I can speak to, because I did work in the schools, I know that, and I wasn't a teacher, but I was in classrooms, and I know what is being taught, and it's not things that are being claimed to be taught. So I think I do speak from that experience. And I think teachers have enough on their plate. They don't have time to be, entering it. In fact, many teachers don't even want to go down that path in terms of, that piece of education. So anyway, I guess I just support Councillor Cole Hamilton's idea. And if he proposed a motion to that effect, I'd be in support. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Moore and Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to clarify if my understanding of what's going on is correct. It seems that it's council's intention to defeat this motion and propose an alternative that leaves the Aaron House organization off the list. Is that what we're talking about? Thanks. So I'm going to sound some cautionary notes. First of all, we have 35 organizations on this list. I have no idea where any of them stand on a whole variety of social issues. So I worry that what we're doing is arbitrary. I also worry about the fact that what appears to be the reports that are coming to us is that two pastors of this particular church were involved in and were quoted in the paper as being at the rally in question. I don't know to what extent they were there as representatives of their church or as citizens of the community. I wonder if we had more time, whether we would give them or their organization the opportunity to come forward and actually speak to the issue to clarify exactly what their intent is. So my concern is whether we're providing both due process and administrative fairness, which are also principles that we strive to uphold. I worry about the potential politicization of this process and the impact should a different council be in, and feel that certain organizations don't represent a particular value or otherwise. So those are my cautionary notes. And in saying all that, I wholeheartedly agree with the other statements that have been made about the issue of the human rights involved and the negative impact on by some of the actions that have taken place, whether intended or otherwise. I think we throw the word hate out, and it's a polarizing word. I've had at least one letter from an individual who said, "I don't hate anybody, but I'm concerned about the curriculum in the school." That may represent a misunderstanding on the part of some of that individual, but it seems to me that it's a highly charged issue and subject to all sorts of potential for misunderstanding. And on that basis, I've got some accord with Councillor Frisch's concern that we might be acting hastily here. So those are the thoughts that I wanted to share in this process. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian and Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to make a couple more points. Last council meeting, we were suggested that 2 organizations should be removed from the tax exemption. This time it's 1 organization, and I kind of think that speaks to how this currently is evolving and not really ready to make a decision on. And I'll just reiterate that, you know, without a policy to fall back on, it really does has the effect of polarizing our community. And I think if we can't fall back on this, our policy says this, and if an organization doesn't follow this policy and we've thought through this policy, if we don't have that behind us, as Councillor Hillian said, it does just become arbitrary, and it can be applied on a whim by any future councils, or we could just decide that we don't like something else that another organization is doing, and people could complain about them. And I don't think it's the right way to do it. I think moving ahead with looking at our policy, opening it up, having the discussion, it sends fair warning to the community that this is the way we're going, and we want to give all the organizations in town that receive a tax exemption to have the opportunity to come to the same conclusion that this policy is a good thing and it supports inclusion and non-discrimination in our community. And maybe we'll find that we have people coming on board with that idea instead of just at the last moment saying, you know what, we're taking that away from you as a punishment because we're here, you're doing things that some people don't like, or that I don't like, perhaps on a personal level. if we don't have that policy, I don't feel like we can, or sorry, by opening up our policy and having a look at that, I think we would probably have a better chance of moving forward with our community in the direction that I think all of this council wants to go. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch. Councillor Moore.
Great, thank you. Yeah, this is the only organization that we've been receiving information on. This is the only organization that's publicly made a stand. This is the only organization that's been in the newspaper. So that's what we're looking at. We haven't had emails about the other organizations, Habitat for Humanity, YANA, there's numerous other ones on here. And it's as a result of some of the things that have been out there. And that have come to light. Now I've just lost my, there it is. And in terms of, new council could do whatever. So if we were to create a new policy based on the current values of council, which we've been, as Councillor Jolicoeur pointed out, anti-hate, anti-discrimination, anti-racist, equity, inclusion, belonging, all those things. I'm assuming that's the kind of criteria that we would be looking at after lots of discussion. So we implement that policy and we determine that maybe there are others that don't fit that. So what would happen in a future situation, hypothetically, is that a new council could come in and they would have to get rid of that policy and put in policy that would allow for all those things. It just seems bizarre to me that I guess that's possible. I guess a brand new council could come in and say, oh, we don't want organizations who get permissive tax exemptions to be all these things. But I think we're operating on what we've conveyed to the community in terms of according to our OCP, according to everything that we're doing. And we've heard loud and clear from the community that this particular organization does not align with those values. And so I think that we need to do what Councillor Cole-Hamilton suggested, remove them for now, create the policy. If they're able to, with our new policy, hopefully we have some aspects of the application that can help illustrate how they're fitting the criteria. And if they fit the criteria, then they're included next time. But as I say, I haven't received anything about Eureka or Child Development, Alano Club, yada, yada, yada. Haven't heard anything. And I've only heard about this one organization. So that's what I'm basing this on, because there's been 2 weeks since the last meeting that, believe me, we could have heard about numerous organizations. Like the floodgates could have opened. We could have had numerous other letters about all the other organizations that are also creating concern. And we did receive emails from people in the queer community, and one of our own council members who feels targeted and has had posts on social media that has made them feel unsafe. And this is exactly the reason why I think we need to set this aside, because it's going against the things that we have said are important. I don't think it's okay for anyone to be targeted. This is not a punishment, in my opinion. This is, getting more information, developing a policy, and then determining. So that's the rationale for me wanting to go that route. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Moore and Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'll try and shorten my comments, as I think we've had a lot of discussion around this, but I did want to respond to some of the concerns expressed. This is really something that I've had a tough time deciding on, because I believe that the best decisions that are made at the council table are ones that rely on sound policy and sound process, and this process has not really met that criteria. It wasn't until after the last council meeting that I saw anything published about the pastor of Aaron House. To me, up until that point, it was kind of things that I had maybe heard out in the community, but it seemed like not a very clear criteria in making a determination about the value of an organization on our list. But then after the last council meeting, when I had, said, I had wondered if there was a way to approach these organizations that have been identified and find out exactly where they stand. But subsequent to that meeting, within a few hours, the pastor of Aaron House posted like a quite a long post about his position on SOGI and why he didn't support it in schools, and it was very clear. And I thought, okay, well, that is like a Facebook post, not sure if it really meets the standard of what I would expect to use for information in a council decision. And then the following morning, there is an article in our paper on front page that clearly identifies this person as the organizer of the anti-SOGI protests, and a quote from him. And to me, that there's a significant difference between being public in the media about putting forward these messages and a list of organizations that I don't have a lot of insight into. And we assume that if they've applied to these grants that they're doing good work and it's a benefit to the community. I think that the suggestion that Councillor Cole Hamilton has made in terms of putting this aside, yes, it won't be included in the tax exemption bylaw, but leaving an avenue that we could revisit it if it's determined that that this organization does meet our policy once it's been reviewed by council. It becomes less arbitrary if there is a way for us to revisit it, maybe not through this exact process, but another way in which an organization could be made whole. And then the last point I would make is that, yeah, it does have the potential to polarize the community. And I would say that ship has sailed. Like this is polarizing. It's a polarizing issue. And we're not going to get away from that by adopting the bylaw. Like, this conflict exists. And unfortunately, we find ourselves in a decision that's part of that polarization. And I don't see how that can be avoided by pushing the decision off. There's citizens who have wrote letters and are included in this agenda that make it very clear that they don't support public tax dollars going towards funding organizations that spread these messages. Like, it's we can't avoid that. And then the other point I wanted to make is that we have public notice on these for a purpose, and part of that purpose is so that we can receive feedback from the public on them, and we did receive it pretty clearly. So I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to defeat this motion and proceed with another course of action as suggested.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum. I haven't really spoken on this topic. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be at the meeting about a month ago when this was first brought up. And I think there's been a lot of really good points tonight. It is polarizing for sure. It's something that has really come to the forefront. There's been multiple avenues that people have been communicating with us, whether it be emails, online, etc. We're here sometimes to make some really difficult decisions, and I would say this is really high up on that list. But But at the same time, it is an opportunity for us to actually stand up for what we believe in. And I think that Councillor Cole Hamilton has put forward an option that allows us to definitively say what we stand for, which I did in a council meeting, but words are just words. And this actually lets us take action on that, but in a way that allows us to move on and hopefully look for ways to not be polarizing. And in that vein, I mean, I would put myself out to meet with the folks at Aaron House as an olive branch to say, how do we, so that we're not just doing this here, but to actually have a follow-up. So again, as a community and as mayor, my job is to represent everybody. And I'd be more than happy to put myself out to have those meetings and look for a way to move forward. Again, looking at next summer as a kind of a deadline. With that, those are the words that I have for now, I think. And I'll pass it over to Councillor Hillian.
Well, thanks, Mayor. I mean, I expressed my cautionary notes earlier on, and what I want to say is that the comments that my council colleagues have made, I listen to, I take seriously, and we've had no advice on this from staff regarding whether or not we jeopardize the city by taking this type of a position. So it does come down to a decision, and for me, it's my cautionary concerns on one side, my concerns for human rights and the well-being of vulnerable people in our community on the other side. And when it comes to that, I know the decision that I'll make, and I'll work with my council colleagues on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hillian. Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Just to thank you, Mayor, and just to perhaps to pick up on Councillor Hillian's point, you said there's been no comment by staff on the advice on sort of what any concerns that might come from this. Perhaps we could take a moment to ask staff to provide what input they can provide at this point, so we move forward with as much information from our staff as possible. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Cole Hamilton. And Mr. Garbutt.
Thank you through the mayor to council as a whole. We understand procedurally what can happen if the motion is defeated and a new motion is made. I'll provide that information prior to council engaging this activity. Ms. Proton can talk to you about should council defeat this motion. I'll ask Ms. Proton to advise you on the steps are for the reintroduction and addressing the matter. If that's council's okay with that, thank you.
Ms. Proton.
Thanks. So if this motion is defeated and the desire is to amend bylaw 3091, we'd recommend that you make these as separate motions just to be clear about the steps that you're taking. So first you would rescind third reading of bylaw 3091, since you had given first, second, and third readings. And the reason for that is that we don't make amendments after third reading. So you would rescind third reading. That would be your first motion. The second one would be to amend as desired. And what I'm hearing is that you want to amend it by removing Aaron House Ministries, which is folio 1960.006. Then you would give new third reading as amended. You cannot adopt a bylaw the same day. There needs to be one clear day between third reading and adoption, which means that you can't do anything tomorrow. So we would ask that you give direction to schedule a special meeting of council for adoption. That would either likely be Friday or Monday, in time for the October 31st deadline. And then there are different ways to do this, but I'd suggest that a fifth motion then would be to direct staff to update the permissive tax exemption policy by a certain point, for example, June 2024. And there might be some preference as to timing on that, and further direct that once the policy has been updated, council consider a grant in the amount of the proposed permissive tax exemption that you removed from the bylaw.
And Councillor Frisch.
Thanks again, Mayor. So I'd just like to acknowledge that the option provided by Councillor Cole Hamilton does offer some fairness, and that it does create an opportunity for this organization to step up and explain how it does fit in with our values, and it does deserve a tax exemption. And I'd also like to say how much I appreciate the mayor's offer to liaise and communicate with the organization to make that clear to them, so that at least we are giving some procedural fairness to this procedure of our tax exemption change. I think it's been quite quick. Maybe it's just me being an old dog and everything, but yeah, thanks very much for putting forward that idea, and look forward to seeing the vote.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch. All right, we have the motion on the floor. I don't see any further questions. Are we defeating or rescinding?
So right now, the motion on the floor is the motion to adopt.
Yes. Just so everyone knows.
I can confirm that the motion on the floor right now is the motion to adopt. So if you're looking at the screen, it's the first recommendation is the motion on the floor.
And do they want to defeat it? And then, or do they want to, because I thought rescinding was its own.
I understand the conversation to be that council is looking to defeat the resolution.
Okay, all right.
Just want to make sure. Just through the mayor and council, I just want to confer with their staff just to make sure we're in the right situation. We've undertaken advertising on this bylaw, so just if we can let staff caucus just for a minute, if that's all right, to just be a very short discussion.
Yeah, we can take adjournment for
10 minutes max.
10 minutes. Okay.
Sure.
All right, so it's as Ms. Parton explained, so I'll call the question. If we want to defeat it, this would be the time.
Sorry, the motion, sorry. The motion is that council adopt it.
Yes.
To be clear.
Yes, and we're,
So the people who are voting for the motion are voting for adoption.
exactly. Okay.
Voting on adoption.
So we're voting on adoption. So if you want to adopt it as is, you would vote yes. If you would like it to be changed, you would vote no. Okay. All right. I'm going to call the question now. All those in favor? Those opposed? Okay, and that's unanimous, so it's been defeated. Would somebody like to make a subsequent? Councillor McCollum.
I'll move that we rescind third reading of bylaw number 3091, 2023.
Okay, it's been moved in second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that's unanimous. Councillor Cole Hamilton, or sorry, Councillor Frisch.
Well, I was actually going to ask staff to read their recommendation, if that's comfortable, if you're comfortable with that, because your wording sounded really good when you said what we could do with creating the grant and so on and so forth.
Hi, Ms. Proton.
Sure, the next motion, in order to do what council would like to do, the next motion I would recommend is that council amend bylaw 3091 by removing Aaron House Ministries folio 1960.006.
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. Yeah. Yeah, Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I was just wanted to check with Ms. Proton. I believe there was a further piece regarding the next step in terms of when the policy would come back and then our subsequent reconsideration. Would it be able to, your wording is always so good, Adriana.
No problem. The next one, we're on actually have three more motions. If that works, it's nice to have them separate, so it's very clear what you're doing.
Sure.
The next one would be to give new third reading to bylaw 3091 as amended.
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's unanimous.
Okay, the next one would be the council give direction to schedule a special meeting of council for adoption of bylaw 3091 prior to the October 31st deadline.
So moved. Yep, so moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that's unanimous.
Okay, and then the last motion to accomplish all of this would be that council direct staff to update the permissive tax exemption policy by June 2024. And if staff have any input on that date, that might be helpful. But that council direct staff to update the permissive tax exemption policy by June 2024. And then once the permissive tax exemption policy has been updated, council consider a grant in the amount of the proposed permissive tax exemption for Aaron House Ministries.
And so my question, just because you were talking about the date, having a specific date versus having a motion that says so that it's ready for it, is the date the better way? I'm not sure if that makes sense. I may be confusing it, but I think that date has been picked, so staff are comfortable-ish. Councillor Frisch.
Well, I'll ask the question directly then that was suggested. How does staff, I guess our city manager, how do you feel about that date and meeting that deadline requested by council?
Through the mayor to Councillor Frisch, unless my colleagues around the table have an opinion on the date itself. It's specific, it accomplishes the task and gives us a target, and we can respond back to council on the work program.
Thank you very much.
And all right, so we have another motion on the floor. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that's unanimous. And I think we're at break time. So I just want to thank staff and council working through this process. So we're for 25 minutes. We'll come back at 7:30. Welcome back, everybody. We're going to go to the next or back to item 6.2.2, the 2023 speed display device program. And I think Mr. Shaw has a presentation for us, or actually Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll move the recommendation.
All right. So even before he opens his mouth, Mr. Shaw, you've got the full support to at least have it on the table. We haven't voted yet, but as soon as you click your clicky thing, I'll give you the table.
Great, thank you. To the Mayor to Council, I'm pleased to present Staff Report 2023 Speed Display Device Program. This report aims to provide Council with an update on the outcome of the 2023 Speed Reader Board program and seeks to support the continuation of this initiative as an annual operational program. Back in 2019, the city partnered with ICBC through their road improvement program, the RIP program, as they call it. This partnership enabled the city to purchase 4 speed display devices for use in school zones and playground zones across the city. In 2023, the city expanded the program by adding 2 additional speed display devices to its inventory and began to deploy these additional assets across the city, specifically to inform staff with respect to specific areas of concern that have been brought forward by also, by council or by residents of the community, of speed collection data and counts from various areas across the city. And moreover, to support the speed study program that we just spoke about in terms of the Crown Isle Speed Reduction Strategy Program. This informal program was also in response to Council's strategic initiative towards the development of traffic calming policy and future implementation plans. With this initiative being based on residents having consistently identified motor vehicle speed in residential streets as an ongoing safety issue. The program also afforded staff the opportunity to review several locations across the city by conducting speed and volume data collection. This report outlines a few of the findings in the same format that we just saw in the Crown Isle Speed Study. The results are outlined in Table 3 of the report. As for the locations themselves, the 2023 listing was developed based on a variety of means, being items and areas of concern that were brought forward by not only council, staff's discussion with the RCMP, ICBC statistical information or reports, public inquiries, and even from staff. Additionally, this program has offered staff the opportunity to further assess its review methodology and establish a Courtney-centric metric for advancing and offering formal policy for council's review and consideration in Q1 2024. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions council may have.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Shaw, for your presentation. And I can certainly say, seeing those speed readers deployed across the city and actually seeing them move, like you'd see them someplace and then a week later they'd be someplace else. I think, it was really inspiring to see how staff innovated and were able to come up with a program like that. So really do appreciate it. Councillor McCollum.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks for the report. This program is one of the programs that we have addressing street safety, and it's something that we receive a lot of positive feedback about from residents. Often one of the only comments that we get is, why can't we have the reader in place more often? Excuse me. The method of being able to deploy it to areas where we're receiving concerns expressed, I think is really valuable, both from like a service perspective and also planning for future safety improvements. I just had a question around the meaning of some of the data in the tables. Like I want to understand it better because we get the 85th speed percentile. I have a pretty good sense of what that is, but one thing I've been confused about is, so it's taking the median, or is it knocking off the top 15%? Is it dropping the slowest 7.5 and the fastest 7.5 and taking, you tell me.
Sure, it's a great question. Yeah. So the 85th percentile is the average of 85% of the vehicles.
Okay, yeah, so it is the
It's median.
mid 85% then, okay. Yeah, I used to think it was the lowest 85%, and then reading the reports this week, I realized that I had the wrong interpretation, so thanks for clarifying that. And then the other column that I don't have a clear understanding of what it means is the percentage of vehicles in tolerated range. I couldn't make a meeting, couldn't understand that.
It's a fair question. So there's quite a few data points. One, total vehicles, speeds within violation, vehicle count respecting the speed limit. So within the speed limit specifically, and then within a tolerance range that is gifted on a percentile basis, depending upon the posted speed limit and the recorded speed limit. So if it's 50, there's a tolerance that is afforded to that capture of data on either side, but still respectful to the speed limit at which you would accustom anyone to be within a variable tolerance that's realistic in terms of their driving patterns on a road that's posted 50. Sometimes you're traveling within 48, 49, or up to 50, 51, 52. So it's a tolerance variance.
That's what I would have thought it meant as well, but some of the tolerances are way lower than the number of people respecting the speed limit. So I couldn't understand why the percentages were lower than the vehicles that are adhering to the limit.
Fair. So there is a lot more data behind the scenes on this. It's a fair question. I appreciate the question, Councillor. There are outliers that remain in existence. So on, as you can imagine, these are speed reader devices that are deployed on residential roads. And so people turn on and off those residential roads as well as into and out of driveways. And so they become an outlier within the statistical data form. And so they're eliminated from the process because they're not actually creating relevant data. And so that has a tendency to skew the overall percentage.
Okay, I'll just stick with the columns I understand better. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum and Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. So I just wonder about with the challenges of enforcement, whether you think a report like this and the other work that staff have done on these issues over the last couple of years are a good argument for photo radar as an enforcement tool. I realize that might be asking you for an opinion, but I think having immersed yourself in this data and knowing about the challenges of actually trying to enforce these limits, I thought your views would be something worth taking note of. For staff in general, I should say, I suppose.
It's a great question. Thank you for that, Councillor Hillian. Excuse me, photo radar enforcement as well as traffic enforcement with respect to intersections is a provincial matter. We've been informed of that on quite a few occasions that the province is responsible for that endeavor and is not currently inclined to afford that privilege to municipalities through bylaw or through means of record and measurement and ticketing.
Any follow-up?
Well, I know that you're encouraged to tell us all we've got great questions. We're not similarly encouraged to tell you you've got great answers. But I appreciate you not wanting to pin yourself down on it. So I'll just be more transparent. And I note that a councillor in Vancouver has just made a serious recommendation that council go on record as supporting traffic surveillance cameras at a whole number of intersections all across the city. And funnily enough, Vancouver, even though it has its own charter, it doesn't have that jurisdiction. As you say, it's up to the province. But in my conversations with people in different neighborhoods who live with this all the time and whose nerves are rattled by motorcycles without mufflers and people in trucks who want to drive them as fast as possible and other folk who want to treat places like Back Road as some sort of racetrack. They see this as really the only way of effectively getting the message out to people that if you want to travel fast, on roads that where it's not safe, there is a consequence for that. And to me, it seems like it's worth us taking a position on that and advocating, through our provincial bodies for that, some sort of increased use of that equipment through the province. Thanks.
Yes, Mr. Garbutt.
Thank you. Through to council, you're likely aware there was discussions at UBCM about this. There's been motions been made. We would absolutely take council direction if we want to write a letter requesting that specifically in our community, if that response to that pressure internally. I know that our current detachment commander has been responsive when we've asked, but we share those resources with wider community. My colleagues as city managers and CIOs with regional districts, et cetera, are constantly hearing about these needs, and the traffic enforcement unit is centralized, et cetera. So council has given us direction to ask for some conversations with the RCMP about priorities, et cetera. And so we're listening, but if council would like, specific actions and requests, et cetera, and it doesn't necessarily have to happen tonight, but feel free to bring those forward. And we are definitely talking both to our municipal and regional district colleagues. We're taking opportunities to speak with the RCMP, and then with the provincial representatives where we have those opportunities. If I may, I sort of want to extend this, but some of Mr. Shaw's staff have been in consultation with provincial people, looking at the history and the numbers that people are talking about there, and then the impact of some of these technologies have done in other provinces. And there's no doubt there's a lot of success. And so we've heard that, road safety and speeds are all things that the province sees as a priority. And so we would certainly take council's direction for more, pointed communication.
Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'll apologize in advance if I missed, you've already said this, but picking up a little bit on what Councillor McCollum mentioned around the 85th percentile, some of the data shows that people are relatively close to going the right speed, let's say 56 and a 50. And yet we sort of encourage enforcement in those areas. Were you saying that there's data outside of that might drive that as well, outside of that 85th percentile, like people going extremely fast and there's outliers, but it's significant enough to make it worthwhile to have enforcement used in those areas as well? Is that your suggestion, or?
It's a great point. It's a great point within the data set to focus on. Max speed is included in the data set. So every day that a device is deployed, it records the max speed of any driver on that day, and it's expressed here in the data or the column. You'll see some examples on roads where the posted speed limit is 50 and the max speed recorded that day was over 100. Right. So the goal, I think, as we continue with this program and we continue to bring forward the toolbox in terms of the council receiving opportunity to provide direction on the policy, is at what point within these metrics do we focus on a particular road in advance of just monitoring, advocating for speed reduction or enforcement or another method of control that might be either an engineered solution or some other measure. As you can see, some of these roads are quite high in terms of their speed violation percentage. 74% of all vehicles traveling on any one road, on back road on any one given day, on average, are in violation of the posted speed limit.
Right, and you were speaking to engineered solutions that would be like designing the road so that people just have to drive more slowly or are encouraged to, subconsciously perhaps or consciously. How does that fit into our plan in the long term? Obviously, it's hard to change all our roads, but is that something that you'd say you're looking at as you redesign roads?
Yeah, obviously in terms of net new, we're using best practices and standards in terms of application within our SDS bylaw and the application of our development applications to ensure that we're meeting those requirements and creating communities that are supportive of comfortable speeds. We've inherited some through time, and we want to continue to focus on those. There are corridors Obviously, ones that come to mind specifically within the community is First Street. It's a fairly long, straight corridor with great sight lines, which has a potential to encourage people to continue to drive at a higher rate of speed. And so there are modifications through engineered solutions that would deviate those sight lines, or potentially curb extensions are a great example of that as well. Rapid flashers in terms of crossing, enhancing things within those corridors to encourage people to reduce their speeds.
Okay.
So that would be something we want to consider through the policy. It's creating the criteria for when those become practical for implementation is what really staff would be looking to council to provide direction on this, as at what point do we act and at what point do we bring those forward in terms of capital solutions.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I think one of the other potential tools that we have in the toolbox is Citizens on Patrol, which our city does help support them. They have a nice little office over in Biltmore Park, but they actually can go out and have a very official looking van and high visibility vests and the gun, and often work in tandem with RCMP, and they're also funded through ICBC, who sees them as a great sort of lever tool to help people reduce their speed. So but we do have the motion on the floor, so all those in favor, and that passes unanimously. Next, we'll go to the BC Social Procurement Initiative. Okay, so the recommendation is that council sign the BC Social Procurement Initiative letter to Minister Kang. It's been moved and seconded. Anybody want to speak to this at all? I think it's pretty self-explanatory. All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. And Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So resolution on the zero carbon step code. And whereas the city of Courtenay's new official community plan has identified climate action goals and aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our community by 45% below 2016 levels by 2030. And whereas the OCP policy BL6 commits the city to advocate to and support the province in amending the BC Building Code and other related policies to regulate carbon pollution for new buildings as soon as possible. And policy BL7 commits the city to review and update immediately relevant building, zoning, and development permitting policies upon any new legislative authorities that support policies within BL6. And whereas the province has responded to advocacy by the city and numerous other local governments by introducing the zero carbon step code, which provides new authority to local governments to regulate carbon pollution from new buildings. Therefore, be it resolved that pursuant to policies BL6 and BL7 of Courtenay's OCP, staff prepare a report outlining options for implementing the zero carbon step code in order to meet the city's 2030 emissions reductions target.
Right, it's been moved and seconded. Do you want to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Mayor. This our OCP and the resolution was a bit wordy, but basically suggests that we should go out and see if we could acquire more tools so that we can regulate greenhouse gas emissions from buildings. One of those tools was the ability to regulate greenhouse gases from new construction. A number of the city passed a resolution which went to UBCM supporting the work of Help Cities Lead, which advocated for this, and a handful of initiatives that help local governments decarbonize buildings with new tools. That was passed by UBCM and 37 other local governments, and eventually led that, along with other advocacy, to the provincial government introducing the zero carbon step code back in the spring. And the District of Saanich, the City of Victoria, City of Nanaimo, and most recently the municipality of North Saanich have adopted the zero carbon step code. And just last week in this room, the CVRD board voted unanimously to ask staff to report back on how the zero carbon step code can be utilized to meet its 2030 GHG reduction targets. And the CVRD staff report noted that Cumberland is also exploring this. So the various jurisdictions are moving towards a common goal here in the Valley, which should assist builders in the community and others by providing a consistent standard. So it's another tool in our belt, and it's something we can use, and it's going to help us get towards a goal which we committed to in our foundational document, the ROCP. So I look forward to hearing discussion by council. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Cole Hamilton and Councillor McCullough.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to this briefly too. I think we're at a point where we have the tools in place and we have policy that's being worked on at the city currently, and it makes sense that we consider this step at this point of time. I would also like to speak to one of the arguments that's often presented against moving in this direction, that we hear from the fossil fuel lobby groups and maybe others who don't want their options restricted when it comes to building homes. Sometimes that comes from industry, sometimes it's from homeowners who really like the current systems that they have in place and maybe don't like to see local government putting work into changing those policies. But something we hear quite often is, especially from Fortis, who is our residential natural gas supplier, that we don't need to limit natural gas connections in new homes because those connections can be supplied by renewable natural gas. Often the supply is from landfills, and the way landfills create natural gas is by organics decomposing in them. So, I mean, ideally, if you have proper diversion, those amounts should go down over time. But I would point out that even in a best case scenario where there's a lot of these projects that are developed, there's only really a few in BC right now. There is nowhere near enough to power the existing connections that they have. So this argument that we can just use a renewable gas for new connections is actually ignoring the fact that that would be renewables that would not be available for any of the existing homes that are already needing natural gas in order to heat. So we should really be looking at ways to limit additional connections so that these renewable gas projects can displace the current gas being burned in homes. So I just wanted to speak to that because it is often a point of confusion that there's this idea that we can provide natural gas heating in a renewable way, but the truth of the matter is that it is mostly a fossil fuel, and there's very little renewable currently available or projected to be available in the future. And I would also point out that when we build a new home and put that type of fuel source in, it's going to be decades of use, and retrofits are expensive. And we are investing a lot of grant money, even at the regional district level, in helping people make retrofits. And we want those retrofits to happen quickly. And we're really ignoring a new source of natural gas if we're not taking these steps to ensure that we're not adding to consumption when we're looking to reduce it. So just wanted to add those comments.
Thanks very much. And Councillor Gilliker.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I'd have to say this is one of the more exciting things that I was really looking forward to come to the table when previously as a citizen community and seeing the OCP's language around this. I think it was one of the few things that I really looked to as an opportunity to have an influence when it comes to emissions in our community. And I really think the province is at a nexus because, it's time in due time to decide on behalf of people in BC and their health, what paths will be taken for residential heating over the next several decades. And we really do need to start to prioritize near-term climate solutions. And this is one of those, prioritizing electrification and true renewables, hydro, wind, and solar. And I'm really excited to see the staff report. I think one of the things that I'm curious about and wondering if staff can speak to it is the different ways in which local governments and and perhaps with what's been explicitly mentioned in the OCP can look at prioritizing both carbon and energy. And this motion today is specifically about the zero carbon step code, but different communities are moving the energy step code at a different implementation rate as the zero carbon step code. So I'm just wondering if would staff have any initial thoughts around what might be applicable to us here in Courtenay.
Mr. Garbutt.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Jolicoeur. So the OCP speaks specifically to the applicable codes inside our community, and the city in the past have been ahead. Perhaps Ms. Wade can speak specifically to those policies, particularly in our community where energy efficiency, given the sort of electrical feed for us is hydro. There's some real opportunities. There's information in the community plan on what makes up our carbon footprint in the valley, and there's quite a bit of discussion when the OCP is moving forward that the big moves on greenhouse gas comes from transportation, but overall the energy efficiency is a huge opportunity, both from an affordability perspective. It really moves towards looking at opportunities to retrofit the existing housing stock. The new housing stock that's coming on is a much lighter general footprint, but what's exciting is the potential on the energy side for the existing housing stock. And there's been quite a bit of conversation around, particularly at this table with our elected officials on the PACE program, et cetera, and rolling all it out. So it all kind of dovetails together to be very positive. The other side too is there's a lot of innovation in the building community on Central Vancouver Island, and they really are interested in demonstrations and really walking the walk. But I don't know if Ms. Wade could speak specifically to the code provisions in the community plan.
Through the mayor to Councillor Jolicoeur, and I also have our manager of building services here too, is that when dealing with the specifics of the building code, it's about one of the policies we did make in the OCP is that we're always going to be one step code level ahead in our targeting. And you'll be happy to know that we're working on the building bylaw, which will be coming forward to you very shortly. That'll be addressing that. And along with that, the zero carbon step code came out with the provincial government along with the building step code. So they kind of go in tandem. And I thought maybe Mr. Preston can talk a little bit about that since it's more his bailiwick. So I'm going to pass it over to him so he can give you a little bit of an update on that.
Thank you, Ms. White, through the mayor to council. So the what we're planning with the energy step code is obviously direction is to keep it one step above the provincial standard. So the province introduced step 3 for residential communities. So the building bylaw is going to address us moving to step 4 when that comes forward. They both sort of go hand in hand. The zero carbon step code and the energy step code influence one another. So if you improve energy efficiency, you're going to reduce carbon emissions. So with council's direction of moving that one step higher, you're actually impacting your carbon emissions as well. The zero step code is based on the same lines as how the energy step code was introduced. So it's 4 levels, and it's introduced on opt-in only basis at the moment. And council can do the same as what they did with the step code, is actually select a level of which you want to enter into. So there is that option for council as well. Another change that'll bring forward with energy is that we will follow the BC Building Code's climatic data. So that'll actually shift us from zone 4 to zone 5. So that'll actually have a higher energy requirement level as well. So hopefully that answers your questions, or if you've got any further, please let me know.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you for that. Just to provide some context of those two things working in lockstep, and just want to, you mentioned the province bringing in the zero carbon, and I think this council, previous council, is part of that advocacy. So I just want to thank my colleagues for that and for bringing this motion forward. I did want to just add a few things in doing some research in preparation for this motion. One of the few exciting things I think can come of this for community members to look forward to, potentially lower energy bills for residents and tenants, more durable envelopes with lower replacement needs, avoided costs of future retrofits, significantly reduced carbon emissions, quieter and more comfortable homes, healthier indoor and outdoor air quality, and really ensuring that equity is included in this, because we know that pollution from buildings disproportionately impacts low-income communities and communities of marginalized groups. So just wanted to say that, and I fully support this. Looking forward to having the support from the rest of the council. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, I also just wanted to thank my fellow councillors for bringing this forward. I think I think there's a lot of benefits. Obviously, I wanted to ask staff if renovations fall under the same criteria as new builds. I know there's a lot of buildings in the valley that are, well, Courtney in particular, that are undergoing massive renovations, and they also have to meet building code, don't they?
Through the mayor to council, the energy step code and zero carbon code are focused on new construction. It is applicable to alterations and additions, but not to the same extent, because it's a little more difficult to apply.
Right, fair enough. So if it's just a portion of a house, you might not necessarily apply it the same way. But if it was a renovation that was like the whole envelope, would you require the same level of a step code?
Through the mayor to council, that would be correct. So if you did an entire renovation on a building, you can apply those elements of the code.
Right. Okay, well, thanks for that. I also wanted to make the point, you may have heard it today on CBC, but there was talk of changing the term natural gas to fossil gas, and apparently it just clarifies the true source of fossil gas, if we might as well try to use it. And it really changes people's perception of what it is. And right now, as we watch climate change, ramp up quickly on us, I think it'll be an easier step for people to undertake. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch and Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Hey, Mayor, I'll just try to keep this brief because I know it's getting late. And I just thought the interrelation between the two step codes is kind of interesting. And I've spent a fair amount of time over the last couple of years working on this. And the interesting thing is the step code that we tend to think of, the one that's been around for years, the energy step code, is about energy efficiency. It doesn't matter what kind of fuel you're using or how much you emit. It's about energy efficiency. And as a consequence, a step 4 home powered by natural gas emits multiple times more greenhouse gases than a step 1 home using a heat pump. So you can see how the energy step code has some impact, but it doesn't really get to kind of the key thing in terms of emissions, which is greenhouse gases. Whereas the zero carbon step code obviously looks at carbon emissions, and the highest levels would require an electric system for both hot water heating and space heating. And I think it was Councillor Jolicoeur listed a number of the sort of the benefits of moving away from fossil fuels and towards a cleaner fuel system. But given that heat pumps would be the equipment that would fit the zero carbon step code, is heat pumps also have the power to get us through things like heat domes, which a traditional furnace won't do for you. And when I started advocating on this back in 2021, we were talking about heat pumps in terms of mitigation, trying to reduce your greenhouse gases. And now, only a couple of years later, we're talking about them in terms of adaptation, in terms of saving your life. Because in just over a week in 2021, we lost more than 600 people due to the heat dome. And if those people had heat pumps, they would be alive today. So I think it's anyway, the fuel switch and sort of what lies behind the zero carbon step code has many different impacts on the community, including literally saving lives. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Cole Hamilton. On that note, I will call the question. All those in favor? Oh, actually, yeah. Yeah, that was unanimous. Okay. So all of a sudden I was like, why do I have notice on here? Because we also have a notice of motion that we put forward. So Councillor Jolicoeur.
You have a slide? No, okay. Sure. So this notice of motion is titled Safe and Inclusive City Facilities. Whereas council's strategic priorities, values, anti-discrimination policy, and guiding principles recognize the importance of upholding the community values of respect, equality, and diversity. And whereas the city recognizes and respects the rights of individuals and groups to freedom of expression, it is also imperative to balance these rights with their responsibilities to ensure the safety and the protection and well-being of all residents. And whereas the resolution serves as a proactive measure to maintain a safe and inclusive environment within city-owned facilities and reinforces our dedication to promoting diversity, fostering understanding, and rejecting acts of discrimination and hate. Therefore, be it resolved that council directs staff to prepare a report outlining options to keep city facilities free of hate and inclusive of all people.
Thanks for that notice. We don't have to worry about seconding it today, and we'll move into council report, starting with Councillor Cole Hamilton, Councillor Frisch, Councillor Hillian, Councillor Jolicoeur, Councillor McCollum, Councillor Morin. And I will just have one thing, and I'm just using every platform that I can. A couple of weeks ago, I called to a emergency meeting around extreme weather response shelters. We have a task force running right now. And so we're looking for people who have a place that is available, that they know is available. So just want to use this as one more place. As we saw it snowing yesterday, we were hoping that this would be up and running by November 1st. So we need to get a place ASAP. We already have a list that we're working through, so we don't need options that people think might work. We need them to come forward with places that they know is available that we can work with. Thanks very much. That's it. In camera again. All those in favor? That's unanimous, and we are adjourned.